Happy Sunday. How are you? You holding up all right?
Semi-conscious, ready for a new show.
I'm
just
telling
saying.
you, welcome everybody. It's the Sunday show, the early Sunday show that starts at 2 p.m. Central. This is your opportunity to call in and defend what you believe, and in particular, why. I mean, it's nice when somebody calls in and says, hey, I believe in this supernatural thing or this God thing or whatever it is. But the why is kind of the important part. Like, why should Seth and I agree with you? I'm Matt Dillahunty. This is Seth Andrews. Welcome to the Sunday show.
I just got back from California Free Thought Day in Sacramento. Big event at the state capitol grounds. And it was a lovely day. It was like 75, hardly a breeze. They had this big display area, all the tents and exhibitors, and they had speakers all day. And I was honored to be asked to be among them. And and I'm going to try to release that speech, I think, in a week. I'm still waiting for some of the extra footage to come in. They had cameras all around, plus my A and B cam, and I'm pretty excited about it because it talks a little bit about how, the Americana has been weaponized. Like, I don't know about you, Matt, but it used to be 20, 30 years ago, I drive down the street and I see an American flag and I'm like, oh, fine, there's somebody who loves their country. And now when I drive down the street and I see an American flag, I make about 25 assumptions about the person who has the flag in their yard, on their truck, hanging on a fence. I'm like, okay, well, I think I know how you voted. I know what your stance is on drugs and guns and the death penalty and Christian nationalism and everything else. And I tend to tick off those boxes. Do you do that, Matt? Tell me I'm not the only one.
You're not the only one. I try to make sure that I'm not making assumptions, but the first thing I'll do is maybe look around to see if it's the only flag. Because if there are other flags there, it tells a very different story. If there's like a United States flag and a pride flag or one of those, in this house, we believe science and blah, blah, blah. Okay. But if it's just a US flag, then I'm like, all right, maybe it's somebody with traditional views and stuff,
Yeah.
But by and large, I find that the flags tend to be flown alongside Trump flags and MAGA flags and other things where I'm like, okay, it may be all posturing. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm a military veteran. I'm proud of the country or what it's supposed to be and what the Constitution idealistically supposed to be, or is idealistically supposed to be. I don't fly a flag in my yard. I've thought about it. I know I'd be tempted to fly it upside down. And since Trump has decided that he can just make laws about flag burning, all I want to do is burn a flag now. Like, I didn't want to draw Muhammad until Muslims told me I couldn't. I didn't want to burn a flag until until somebody decided to say, no, you can't do that. Because for me, that's just a ridiculous encroachment on freedom to say, oh, no, you can't make this particular statement of burning a cloth. Well, it's really wild for President Bone Spurs to be telling me what I can and can't do with the flag that I bought in the country that I actually served.
Well, I don't have a problem with the American flag. It's a national marker. And I think in a healthy sense, working for a nation that we could be proud of. I don't think national pride means we have to say we're superior to anybody else. But that's how I was raised. We're the greatest country on the face of the earth, even though we fail in almost all major metrics, from education to healthcare to cost of living to, all of violent crime, etc. But, it's like the Pledge of Allegiance. I talk to people who live in other countries around the world, and they're like, it's so odd that you in a free country are pretty much required to take this rote loyalty oath. And if anybody decides, I'm not necessarily comfortable with that, like I'll pledge allegiance to the truth or to human goodness or to justice or to humanity. But this sort of my country, right or wrong thing, which is what the pledge so often is, I will be allegiant to a loyalty oath doesn't feel like freedom. And the people who opt out are really Judas. They're treated like heretics. They are often penalized or punished. We've seen stories of students who decided they didn't want to stand for the pledge and say the oath, and they ended up in the principal's office. And they were threatened to be
Yep.
expelled. We've had all of these other controversies going on. I don't know. I've been having those conversations. But the reason I mentioned California Free Thought is I thought of you, Matt, because I know you get into a lot of debates. This event attracted street preachers. There were some gems. There was one dude, he claimed he was the Messiah. We didn't spend all that much time together, but I was honored. To be able to meet the Messiah in person is something most people don't get to do. There was another guy who was straight out of Life Church, Jesus t-shirt, and he was like, I was over ministering to the homeless, but when I saw you guys, I realized why Jesus had brought me here. He brought me here to
Awesome.
spread the good news, And the whole time I'm like, well, we're not broken. We don't need to be fixed. And do you have any idea how presumptuous your presence here is? But the big one was this guy who was on an e-bike pulling a trailer. And the trailer had these placards, like posters all over him about repent for the day is at hand, and, salvation and repentance messages in several languages. And through a Bluetooth speaker, he was blasting sermons from the 20th century evangelist Billy Graham. It was so obnoxious. And so I went over and engaged the guy. And he was from, I think, one of the Slavic nations. He had a very thick accent. We were working through that. I don't think he had a very good grasp on the language, which is weird. If he's going to evangelize, I think he has to be able to effectively communicate. He was really struggling. But I was like, okay, well, do you think I'm going to hell? And he's like, I don't believe in hell. But I think he said I do, but I don't think you're going to burn. So his hell has apparently got some futons in it and stuff,
It's
but I'm
Billy
separated
Graham.
from Jesus.
So Billy Graham went to seminary alongside Fred Phelps, and this was one of their major points of disagreement. Billy Graham was an annihilationist and believed that hell was a metaphorical, complete separation from God. So if he's a Billy Graham fan, it makes sense that he would kind of go down that road.
But how do you get around that? Depart from me, you who are cursed, into a lake of everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. I mean, that's straight up right out of the New Testament. How does Billy Graham get around that?
I don't know. He's dead. So
Well,
I never
you
got a chance to ask him. And it's funny. And basically, you just played the role of Fred Phelps by citing an actual verse. And I've said before, one of my favorite debates of all time was between two apologists arguing about basically what it takes to be saved. And I think, if I'd have been there and I'd have met the actual Messiah, I would have asked him which group was right, the premillennialists, the postmillennialists, or the amillennialists, and whether or not the millennium was actually a literal 1,000 year period, like down to the second, or if it was just a metaphor for a long time. Because that'd be an interesting conversation to have. Because if he's back in the New York groove. Sorry, Ace Frehley recently died, and so that song's been stuck in my head. But if he's back, does this start the 1,000 year period, or does this end the 1,000 year period, or neither? And at least you'd get an answer. You're talking to, Jesus, kind of.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me, and I was talking to the guy at Sacramento. By the way, we're waiting on callers for apologists if you want to call in and defend or explain your God.
720-619-2288, or the web link down below the chat. If you want to defend your God belief and just don't want to listen to us blather on, get your calls in. It's going to be a good day.
So I'm like, well, do you hold to Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis and the 10 Commandments and Noah's Ark and all that? And he was like, nope. He just wrote off 75% of the Bible. I'm just New Testament, just the Gospels, just Jesus. And I think I asked the question, what was your criteria? How did you get there to just take literally a razor blade and lock out 3/4 of the Bible? And he had no idea. He just knew it was New Testament. I think it may have been a riff on the New Covenant thing. When someone comes to you and they're like, well, Jesus came and therefore we have the New Covenant, and it wipes out the old covenant in the Old Testament. Your response to that is what?
Oh, my
Not a
response.
rhetorical question, Matt. I want to know how you respond.
I thought you, for some reason, I thought you were getting ready to ask him.
No, no, no.
See, and how I deal with these things has changed from when I was a believer. Because, for example, I have no idea whether or not I would have been an acceptor of like premillennial, postmillennial. I don't think I thought about those sorts of things. I just knew, I was saved, and at some point Jesus was coming back, and the important thing was for me to share that with people, even though I didn't understand it. And so I didn't have a good answer for a great number of those things. And
But if
this,
someone
it's like this
said Jesus
1,000-year
wiped
period.
out all the horrible stuff in the OT, like New Testament only, do you go to Matthew 5 on them, or what do you do?
Oh, no. Yes, you can go to not a jot or tittle of the law will change. But I don't mind the notion that, for example, there's one set of rules for the Jews, and there's a different set of rules for the Gentiles. There's the Noahic covenant and the Mosaic covenant. And even though it doesn't completely make sense to me, I at least get that kind of distinction. And it reminds me of the people trying to figure out whether or not is God talking about different dispensation periods, or is there, something actually literal about when he's coming back? And my go-to for a lot of these is God never answered this question for me, but the Bible says, let God be true and every man a liar. And so until that changes, I have no reason to believe you. You're just another person, telling me your opinion about what the Bible says. And even you would, I hope, agree that whoever I'm talking to, that I shouldn't be listening to or caring about your opinion of the gospel. I should be caring what the Holy Spirit guides me to. And that's my walk with Christ. And stuff like that shuts them up because they're not used to being kind of put a step back by somebody who at least knows that their opinion is just their opinion. And I have no interest in debating which version of scripture is right. And now I only care about debating whether or not any of it is right and how they would show it.
I know there's somebody in the switchboard, but you mentioned Ace Frehley. We were warned about KISS when I was going through the satanic panic of the 80s, right? Because they said KISS stood for Knights in Satan's Service and all of that. And Gene Simmons vomits blood, and it's just a big satanic orgy and blah, blah, blah. But I wanted to brag a little bit about my Halloween display out front. We have a skeleton rock band, but Natalie and I built an Ozzy Osbourne, who also recently passed away and who we were warned about was the devil. And, when he died, of course, he became this sort of sweet, grandfatherly, the most benign figure on the planet, after the 80s ended. And it's so weird that everybody was so terrified of him. But we took a skeleton and we put some like leather pants on him and an Ozzy Osbourne shirt and the blue sunglasses and the straight black hair. And we made fiery wings. So we actually have wings that are black and they're outlined with fiery feathers. And I put a spotlight on him and we hung him over the skeleton band. So while Bon Jovi is playing their tunes on the ground, Ozzy, the angel, is flying overhead. And that's how we have honored Ozzy Osbourne in death. But and it's funny, the icons of my youth are starting to pass, Matt.
Oh, yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah, the list is getting longer. Did you produce music specific for Bon Jovi to play, like "Oh No, Haven't Got a Prayer" instead of "Living on a Prayer"?
I wish I was that good. But what we're going to do the night of, one of my listeners, Jason Stubbs, is an engineer, and he actually rigged the arms of the guitar players and the drummers. They don't play an instrument, but they give the illusion. And then on Halloween night, I've got a disco ball over the driveway, and we're going to put a fog machine there and turn the driveway into a dance floor. So the hundreds of kids who come to get their candy can boogie with their parents, and we'll play everything from Thriller to Bee Gees to whatever other party music we can find. It's a big deal around here. And as someone who was once warned about Halloween, there was a comedian, a Christian influencer back in the 80s. His name is Mike Warnke, who turned out to be a total fraud, by the way. But he claimed to be an ex-Satanist high priest. And he produced a book and an audio recording about the origins of Halloween, the satanic origins. And of course, my parents took it as gospel. And all the stuff he said was total crap. It was the typical, they're going around kidnapping black cats for sacrifice and lock up your daughters and putting razor blades in the candy. And it's all about the devil, etc. And anyone who's done even a cursory look at the haunted history of Halloween and its ties to the Catholic Church knows that there's so much more to it. But we weren't allowed to do anything scary. You can dress up as Bible characters. You can be a clown or something, and clowns are scary, but they weren't back then. But these days, all bets are off. We can be whatever we want to be. And maybe that's one of the reasons I've gravitated to the holiday. So that's been the Andrews home for the past several. It's just happened.
See, I can't. I'm a huge Weird Al fan, and for most of my life, I have rewritten songs in my head on the fly while driving. Usually, I make them absolutely filthy because, for whatever reason, that makes me dig. But it's like you've got this rock band out there called Bon Jovi, and it could be,
Here we go.
Oh, we're here for a scare. Oh, you haven't got a prayer. We'll take your soul. To hell we'll all drive. Oh, well, you can't get out alive or whatever. You could do that and get a band and what do I know?
That's good. I mean, that's good. So hats off. Props to you, brother.
Well, we've got a call we can go to. I just want to mention one more thing before we actually get to this call. And that is that yesterday was the No Kings protest. It was also the day that the line got together to raise money for the Secular Student Alliance. I think Arden will know the total that we've raised so far, although I will say that the fundraiser continues until, is it October 31st?
I don't know. I think it's 11 more days, but we are currently at $56,306 out of our $35,000 original goal.
$56,000, which is also going to add on a $10,000 matching donation from Phil and Robin Ferguson. So that takes us to $66,000 raised in the span of about 4 or 5 days for the Secular Student Alliance. And we did that thanks to the overwhelming generosity of the viewers of the line who came through, even though there were people at a protest. There's lots of things to potentially say about this protest. I know we're going to get to calls about religion and everything else. My favorite statement about the protest actually came from the New York Times Police Department, which was noting that they had about 100,000 people marching the streets in New York City. The estimates are that more than 7 million people came out at 2,600 protests around the country. But over 100,000 people marched the streets in New York City, and there were 0 arrests. There were no problems. This wasn't January 6th. No officers died. No Capitol buildings were molested and thrown over and broken. It was people standing up and doing what the Constitution allows them to do, to exercise their right to protest their government for a redress of grievances. And what did the President of the United States do after seeing more people than ever in the history of this country stand up united to protest the leader? Well, he shared an AI-generated video of him in a fighter jet dropping turd bombs on the protesters. Just big steaming piles of wet, messy poop directly onto American citizens. I don't know that the metaphor can get any more clear. He's shitting on America. He's attacking America with the military, and he's doing it while wearing a crown as the Americans down below are wishing we could go back to learning No More Kings from the Schoolhouse Rock soundtrack and actually contemplating whether or not we would be better under the King of England. If he is the new king sitting over there going, "You'll be back," or something, who knows?
Yeah.
Well, but it's bizarre that the left didn't do anything remotely problematic. Just stated our views.
I produced a short video I was at 2 different protests. I spent most of the day outside with the protesters in the rain yesterday here in my hometown of Tulsa, and I produced a video. It's on my personal Facebook page. But in the comments section, I have been seeing a lot of, if we truly had a king, you would not be free to protest, meaning the fact that you were even out there tells me that your premise is false. And I was reminded of when author and activist Stacey Abrams out of Georgia she was on television recently talking about the authoritarian playbook, and she had sort of listed out, and I'm like, well, we're in the process of this, right? You win an election, you expand executive power, you either make Congress complicit or you neutralize them. You neutralize the judiciary. You neutralize or co-opt the courts. You fire experts, anybody who can speak with expertise and challenge. At all leadership positions, you install loyalists. You then either shut down or take over all communication centers. You make them propaganda outlets. You blame and shame and name and target others, vulnerable people, the different immigrants, foreigners, trans people, you name it, anybody who dissents, they're treasonous. You eliminate anybody who can assist them. So that's why they're suing law firms. They're certainly going after universities that open their doors and make provision for minorities. You militarize the streets. And then at the end of the day, you just say, well, any future election would be invalid. So we're going to cancel elections outright. And that's the standard 10-point authoritarian playbook. So when someone tells me, well, the fact that you were able to protest tells me that you are not, in fact, under the leadership of a king, I'm like, well, we're heading toward that end zone. We're trying to stop them from crossing that line. And I was excited to see the millions of people come out. And I saw goodwill and good cheer. There was music, there was laughing. The signs alone were worth the trips out to these 2 different locations and browsing the internet. And I made one other point, and I'll make it here quickly. Sorry, Matt.
No problem.
But all of the progresses that we have made in life have come through progress, or through protest, rather. I mean, we're a nation founded by protesters. They were protesting. If you look at the ending of slavery, that ended through protest. If you look at the suffrage movement, they took the right to vote through protest. We saw Vietnam veterans protesting the unjust Vietnam War. We saw civil rights activists protesting discrimination. We saw LGBT protesters who were working towards civil rights and equality, anti-discrimination laws throughout history. Any progress that has been made has likely been made through protest. What could be more American than freely expressing and freely protesting? And the fact that Donald Trump, the man-child Donald Trump, would respond by literally shitting on 7 million people who are freely doing what the Constitution says they can and should do, I think that's extremely telling. And the fact that he's not been challenged or the 25th Amendment has not been invoked, to me, I just wonder if Humpty Dumpty will ever go back together again, Matt. Like, there is no bottom. Like, so if this wouldn't be the threshold, what would be the threshold, right?
I concur.
Yeah.
Also, I have another parody, but I'll do it again later because it's different. We've got callers, and I want to get to them, especially since Ben is a theist, and we always prioritize theists here. Pronouns are he, him, wants to talk about traditional Catholic definition of God as the ground of being. Hey, Ben, welcome to the show. You're on with Seth and Matt.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Seth. Thanks for having me. I know it might seem like I'm trying to be the trickster here, but I do have a master's degree in theology. And I do think the definition, I don't know how aware you are of this, but like the traditional Thomistic definition of God is that God is the ground of being, and there's an appeal to the scriptures where the name of God is revealed in the Tetragrammaton, which means I am who am. So
it's like Papa.
I do think if you would say like God, so then the question of God, is God a being who exists, would be absurd. You recognize that, right?
Would you do me a favor and define what you mean by ground of being?
Or ground of existence. So that which, I don't know how to say it more fundamentally, that which gives existence to everything which exists.
So
So you're saying that everyone's definition of God would or should be ground of being?
Yes, I believe that I would be an atheist, and I've had a lot of conversations with
Yeah. I don't
Protestants
really
who
care what your
do
experience
define.
is at the moment. Hang on. What I want to know is how you define ground of being, and are you asserting that everybody else is, or in some way defining it the same way?
No, I agree. I don't think you define it that way, and I don't think a lot of Christians define it that way.
Okay.
But I do think that is a traditional Catholic view. I think you would recognize that, to define God as the ground of existence.
So that's certainly a part of traditional Catholic views, but I don't care whether or not something's a traditional view or a Catholic view. I only care about whether or not it's true. So when you asked me if I would agree that it's absurd to ask if God is a being, no, I don't think that's an absurd question to ask, since so many people believe that God is in fact a being, right?
Right, but I'm just saying it's incompatible with the definition, because you'd be saying, does the
yes.
ground of existence exist?
So no. You're assuming the Catholic definition, ground of existence, and then saying if you agree with that, to then ask if God is a being is absurd. No, I don't think that's necessarily absurd. I don't know how you can demonstrate. First of all, as Seth was pointing out, I don't know that we have a good definition of what a ground of existence is. Also, to whatever extent, I've never seen a demonstration that existence requires, needs, or could have a ground. I've also never seen any sort of evidence-based argument to suggest that we have discovered what that grounding is, and there's nothing been shown to say that even if there is a ground of existence, whether or not that is also a being, whether or not it's absurd. So no, I've rejected every point of your thing. And so how do we know that there is a ground of existence?
Okay, well, you'd have to start with the term existence. And there is actually no way to prove that anything exists other than that we grant it.
Ben,
correct?
Please stop. Ben, please stop. Do you think you and I share an existence?
Yes.
Cool. Me too.
And I think we know what the word existence means.
Me too. So let's not worry about whether or not we're right about that. We're now both trying to explain the same existence that we think we share, correct?
That's right. And the explanation would be the grounding.
Are you saying, I'm trying to get to something. I don't need anything other than a yes or no for just a second, and then you can go. Are you saying,
no problem,
in this existence that you and I share, it must have a grounding, and that you have identified what this grounding is?
The first part, I would say, yes.
Okay.
Existence must have a grounding.
Why? And what does that mean?
Why must existence have a grounding? Because we experience ourselves as contingent. So I am born, I die. And yet we also experience ourselves as having continuity. So I do think it's the most basic foundation of science, religion, all pursuits that we want to say, like, well, what explains things?
Those are all words, and they might be words consistent with a master's in theology, but none of them explain how you know that the existence we share needs and has a grounding. You're just saying we experience ourselves in some way, and you think that requires a grounding. What is the demonstration that the existence you and I share requires a grounding?
Well, I just think it's obvious, just like existence is obvious.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Ben, but
I'm sorry, Ben, but I don't have a master's in theology, and I'm completely unimpressed by those who do, especially when the argument in defense of their position on theology is they just think it's obvious. Would you at least agree that arguments or claims like, I just think it's obvious, are completely useless and an admission of defeat?
No, because you said existence is obvious. And there are
no, I didn't. No, I didn't, Ben. No, I didn't, Ben.
Yes, you did.
I did. No, I fucking didn't. Here, let me mute you since you're incapable of doing this correctly. I did not say that existence was obvious. I asked if you agreed that you and I share an existence, and that if you did and we were trying to explain it, that we would just skip past the details of whether or not there is an existence. At no point did I say existence is obvious. Okay? I'm sitting here pointing out that you and I think we share an existence. We'd love some sort of explanation for how it is the way it is and why it is the way it is. And you're claiming that this existence requires a grounding. I'm not convinced of that. And your argument was that you think it's obvious. My follow-up question, which is the one I would like an answer to, is if someone were to ask you why something is the way it is, and your answer was, or you were to ask someone, why is this the way it is? And they said, oh, it's just obvious. What would your reply be?
It would depend what they're referring to.
Sure. Why is the sky blue? Or what reason do we have to think that the sky is blue? And they answered, it's just obvious.
Well, you're actually making my point. You're saying the
I'm sorry.
phenomenon of the sky being blue
I asked a
leads
question.
to questions about why is it blue.
I'm sorry. I'm not making your point here. I'm exposing that you haven't made your point. If someone says, how do you know that flowers are pretty because there are gremlins in the garden? And they say, it's just obvious. Have they explained a thing at all or provided any edifying or useful information by saying it's just obvious? There, that's the question.
I'm not sure what you're saying. If someone is saying the flowers are pretty because...
Okay, since you're not sure what I'm saying, let me mute you and repeat it. You are in a conversation with someone, and you ask me, hey, why do flowers, what is the grounding for flowers? And I say, there are flower fairies that produce the flowers and give them their enhanced beauty and smell. And you say, how do you know that there are flower fairies? And I say, it's just obvious. Have I provided you with any sort of explanation at all that in any way edifies anyone or anything about that subject?
No, but if you
don't get to say
say
but. No, Ben, you don't get to say but. So you've already failed at this. You are now in kindergarten mode. Okay? I'll let you continue here in just a second. So now you're willing to acknowledge that saying it's just obvious is not in any way an edifying response, correct?
Well, if I could make my point, but if you're
I'm
just
sorry,
I'm sorry,
Ben. I'm sorry, Ben. I asked you a question. You are now acknowledging the very thing you tried to reject a moment ago, which is that merely saying it's obvious is in fact not an edifying response, correct?
In most cases, I agree with you, but not in
all cases. No, you don't get to go to your special pleading, Ben. When I asked you how you know that...
Okay, can I give you a counterexample?
I'm sorry. No. See, this is the thing. You don't get to shift the burden of proof by asking for a counterexample. You're the one making a claim. You're claiming reality requires a grounding. And when I asked you why, you said it's just obvious. You're like the dude in that meme about you can tell it's a tree because of the way it is. You don't get to ask me for a counterexample because no counterexample needs to be given for an unfalsifiable proposition. Now, I'm going to let you do your best to give your reason for why, other than it's obvious, which wasted now about 6 minutes of all of our time. Instead of going with it's obvious, I would like you to make a case for why why reality requires a grounding. And then if you're successful in convincing us that reality requires a grounding, we'll let you go on to explain how you know what it is. So let's try this. Ben, why does reality require a grounding?
Okay, so you said the answer to a question can never be,
I'm sorry. Nothing I've said is in any way relevant to your case for why reality requires a grounding. I'm sorry that you're so bad at this, but you, like many other apologists, have decided to make this about me instead of about your actual position. You called in asserting that reality requires a grounding. I have a very simple question. Let me unmute you.
Is never sufficient.
Ben,
as
Ben,
an
are you
answer.
ready?
That's
Ben,
what
are
you
you
said.
ready? Ben, are you ready for my really simple question?
Can I respond?
No,
You
Ben.
said-
I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry, Ben. You're so bad at this that it's making it really difficult to even get this done. I'm going to unmute you, and I have a very simple question for you. Are you ready for the very simple question?
So you're not. I can't challenge a statement that you
I'm
made.
sorry, Ben. I'm sorry, Ben. I'm sorry you're so bad at this that all you want to do is avoid the actual discussion and then pretend like you're not being allowed to challenge. I'm asking you a question. So here's the question for, once again, Ben, are you ready for the easiest question ever?
I'm ready to respond to your point and hear your response.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you don't know how to have a conversation without whining all the time. When I ask you a question that has a yes or no answer, you can just say yes, and then you'll stop digging this hole that wastes everybody's fucking time.
Can I
So
ask
Ben,
you a question?
Ben, no,
Can
you
I
don't
ask
get to
you a
ask me.
question?
No, Ben, you don't get to ask me shit until we move past this point. I'm sorry that this is so difficult for you, but it's not your fucking show, and you've already shown that you are fucking dishonest by contradicting yourself. So I want a yes or no answer, and that's it. And that will determine how much further this moves on. Ben, I'm going to unmute you, and I would like you to answer yes or no. Are you ready for the simple question?
Challenge it.
Are you ready for the simple question? Okay. Say goodbye, Ben.
You said.
No, you don't even get to say goodbye, Ben. Here's the thing. The simple question was going to be, is there anything that I have ever said that is remotely relevant to your reasoning for why reality requires a grounding? That's an incredibly simple question. The answer to any reasonable, honest interlocutor is no. Nothing Matt has ever said is relevant to whether or not I have justification for saying that reality has a grounding. So when I ask you to give your defense for why reality has a grounding, and you start by saying, you said, you are not offering your defense for why reality has a grounding. You are trying to avoid the entire discussion. So despite the fact that you completely failed to have any sort of discussion to answer the simple question, I'm going to assume that you and I had this back and forth, and you acknowledged that nothing I've ever said is relevant to the case for reality having a grounding. And I'm then going to do something incredibly magnanimous because I'm feeling generous. And I'm going to give you one final opportunity to give your reason for why reality requires a grounding. If you mention me, I will hang up. If you mention what I've said, I will hang up. If you whine about being put on hold or not being allowed to finish, I will hang up. I need you, when I unmute you, to say, here's why reality requires a grounding, and then give that explanation. Failure to do so will be viewed by everyone who watches this as a complete admission of defeat. And you don't want that. You don't need that. Because you, if you're sincere, understand why you think reality has a grounding. You have a master's in theology, supposedly. So, Ben, let's unmute you. And I would like for you, without hesitation, without whining, to say, here's how we know reality needs a grounding, and then give us your reason. And the floor is now yours.
Okay, great. Thank you. The reason we need a grounding of reality, which you actually made the point, is you said if the girl asks about...
See? Goodbye, Ben. I told you I'd hang up if you mentioned what I said at all. And then you did it. You have just admitted complete defeat. So I'm sorry that we don't get to continue with this theistic caller who seems more worried about whether or not I said something or made something. Cannot I mean, even go back to the beginning of the call when Seth just asked him, what does that mean? And he wasn't sure. I have difficulty taking people seriously. I have difficulty believing that this individual has a master's in theology. But even if he does, it doesn't impress me or matter. And the fact that, and actually, I hope he doesn't, because it really speaks volumes as to how bad the state of apologetics are, that someone can go get a master's in theology and not understand that believing reality has a grounding does not necessarily exclude the possibility that that grounding is a being. That is a separate issue. So Ben can't argue from A to B, and seemingly what I've said, and maybe what Seth said, I don't know, he didn't really dig in on what Seth said, but maybe what you and I have said, Seth, is just absolutely crucial to whether or not reality has a grounding, which makes me wonder, how did someone come up with the notion that reality needed a grounding before you and I existed?
I don't know. I'm not exactly sure. He never defended his premise, the foundation of the rest of the argument. I was curious to see kind of where he was going to take it.
Yeah.
You don't want to give him obviously too much rope, because then we're spinning off into oblivion. But, how do you know what that grounding would be? How would you define the grounding? What's the depth and the width of the grounding? Is it there are a lot of questions attached to it. Apologists are frustrating anyway. The word apologetics translates speaking in defense. And yet it is odd to hear, especially the armchair apologist, and how poorly they're able to defend the faith. And beyond that, apologists or experts or self-professed experts disagree with each other on the very basics of their theology. So I do find that a bit frustrating, yes.
It's really strange because, so this is something that I've discussed many times, and I actually took notes even before he started talking on the sorts of questions that I would ask. And on this notion that God is the ground of being, the first question I was going to ask is the one that you asked. What does that even mean? Please tell me what ground of being means. Because once we define it, then the next question becomes, okay, is that a real thing? Is it testable? Is it identifiable? Do we think there's good reason that whatever we've just defined here actually exists? For example, does mathematics need a grounding? Do we need something out there that guarantees that 2 + 2 = 4 in base 10 for appropriate definitions of 2 = plus and 4? And it turns out that while that's a bit of a joke for the various definitions of 2 = plus and 4, that's the closest thing to a grounding there is. The defining of terms, which is something that we say, the concepts of here's a quantity and here's a quantity, and together this is what we're going to call this quantity. To say that those things require a grounding is something I can't comprehend. And if the only answer I get is that, well, it's just obvious that they have a grounding. Okay, well, it's not obvious to me. And so I'll need you to show how it's obvious. Normally, if something's obvious, it should be easy to demonstrate, I would think. Right?
All I know is when you said Flower People, I was thinking of that song by Spinal Tap. I just went to see the sequel, where they sing, listen to the flower people bloom. Yeah, it's a classic song. So when you said Flower People, thank you. The earbug is now stuck in my head for the rest of the afternoon. Your fault.
Awesome.
But thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah.
I'd love to, Ben, if you can put together a thing that says, hey, here's how we know what a grounding is and how reality has a grounding, and do it without making it about me, then I will take you seriously. But as long as you, like most of the apologists that call in, seem to want to make it about me, you're going to fail, because there's nothing about me that is remotely relevant to any case for a God. All right. We have Chris calling in from the UK, pronouns he, him. This will be a fun follow-up. Chris, welcome to the show. You're on with Seth and Matt, and you want to talk about answering apologist arguments.
Hey, yeah, that's right. Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yep, we're fine.
Okay. Yeah, I've been through this very long, spiritual journey, I used to be very devout, but long story short, I'm kind of agnostic now because I can't really find hard evidence. But whenever I look at the arguments that apologists have, to me at least, they feel very polished and compelling, and it always feels like I have to learn a whole degree's worth of stuff just to refute it, and I never really get to a kind of conclusion either way. I'm gripped with this fear of hell, but I also really don't want Christianity to be true. It doesn't fit with my own beliefs morally, and it's just I can't sort of break from this fear and be certain.
Well,
And when you
Yeah.
jump in, I can.
yeah, go for it. God,
Well, I hear, first of all, engaging an interlocutor in terms of counter apologetics, it sounds like you're still sort of on the journey trying to figure out where you are. I don't think that's the place where you begin to get into those types of I think if you want to hear perspectives, if you want to hear information that then you can go vet, that's interesting. And I think that can be a relevant part of where you are. But I don't think this is the time that you want to engage people who are approaching you as apologists. I think this journey is really about you. You need to be at a little more of a destination. And the second thing is, I don't think you go into these discussions. I don't think any critical thinker goes in saying, I need to know how to refute what you are now saying. Because the responsible approach is, I have to assess what you're saying and then seek out the evidence and see if the evidence refutes it. I remember I was talking to a believer once, and I was laying out some of the challenges I had with Christianity, and her response was, well, you know what? I need to go and find information to refute what you just said, which is not how we approach truth. So, is this your wheelhouse? Are you comfortable there? Because if it's not a comfortable zone, I would walk softly. I wouldn't necessarily throw myself out there. I think I would further define where you are on the road before I engaged people in terms of counter apologetics. And there are some counter apologetics resources out there that deal with a lot of the basic things that we often hear. Apologists are very slick. I, believe it or don't, was invited to debate the Shroud of Turin on Piers Morgan a few months ago. I don't even like Piers Morgan. But I thought, okay, fine. I'm not a shroud expert. I'm not an expert in medieval times. I'm not an expert in carbon dating or any of those things, but I do talk Jesus. You want to talk Jesus? Let's do that. So I show up on Piers Morgan against one of the slickest apologists you have ever heard. Used car salesman, smooth as butter, almost too polished so that you didn't trust him. And this is a tactic. You throw a bunch of, it's called the Gish Gallop is one of the aspects of this, where you throw a ton of stuff out slickly and quickly, overwhelm your interlocutor who cannot keep up. And as these types of debates often publicly become a style over substance exercise, the person with the better style will sometimes appear as if they won the debate. But I think don't allow them to overwhelm you. I think you hear a point, you stop them, you say, well, let's talk about that. What is your evidence for that? I think this may take time because I'd like to assess it, not run out and refute it, but I want to find out, well, what's the evidence say? Slow everything down. But before you even begin that engagement, I really think you need to be sponging up some information on your own. Take your time. There is no rush to go out and engage the rest of the world until you know more about who you are and what you're about. I don't know, Matt. Do you agree, disagree with that?
No, I agree with that. One of the things is, I mean, you can see Ben is in chat, and Ben is trying to shift the burden of proof in chat as if he didn't just get schooled in here on how to absolutely fail at having these sorts of conversations. So, Chris, I would recommend that you go back and look at pieces of the conversation with Ben, because it turns out when you ask them for definitions, when you say, what does that mean? How do we know that's true? You'll get them to a point where they have to demonstrate that there's some sort of methodology, some sort of epistemological foundation, some sort of reasoning process by which they're reaching a particular conclusion. And then the next question is this method for arriving at truth one that I already accept? Does it have a demonstrated reliability? You know, is this like something you can demonstrate scientifically or through observation or through testing? Is it something that is purely philosophical? Is it, you know, is there a difference between, you know, this being an abstract concept and some sort of concrete fact about reality? And for the overwhelming majority of them, they're not going to have answers. Even guys with supposedly masters in theology often don't have answers that are useful or edifying at all. Oh, it's just obvious. And then they come into chat and it's like, oh, does Matt deny this? As if it matters what I denied. Ben is still hung up, even in chat, on my statements and whether or not instead they need to make a case for something. It reminds me of the apologists who want to argue against evolution, as if proving evolution wrong in any way demonstrates that there's a God. Even if you were to show that everything we know from the science of biology is fundamentally flawed, all the way down to original observations or presumptions about genetics and passing on DNA, even if you showed all that is flawed, it still wouldn't prove that God from the Bible created the earth in 6 days or 6 time periods or whatever else. They still have all of their work left in front of them. I'm wondering, Chris, when you say that you keep coming up with facing off with apologists that have polished arguments that you're not really ready to address yet, can you give me an example of one that you find as a sticking point? But also, I'll note that agnostic and atheist are not mutually exclusive things. You are either convinced that a God exists, in which case you are a theist, or you are not convinced, in which case you are an atheist. And there are no other options. Agnostic is not some middle ground. But do you have an example?
Well, I suppose, and I say this because I suppose I'm not as intelligent as I want to believe I am, but there is, I think they call it textual criticism, which is the looking at the manuscript of, say, the Gospels and trying to verify their, validity. And there was an online this thing called the Alpha Course, where they talk about how these documents are clearly very, very valid. Does that make sense?
Well,
we don't have any manuscripts, like original manuscripts is one of the challenges. And I think I don't know if that's where Matt would begin, but I think the earliest gospel is dated around 80 BC or CE rather, not BC. But this idea that, they're able to quote from the original texts, and we're like, nobody's got the original texts. Is that where you would start on that, Matt, or would you take another tack?
I tend to go with it doesn't matter. Like, I could grant you, like, let's say that despite the fact that we have no originals, we have no manuscripts, we don't know who the authors are, we do have at least a reasonably good understanding that the content of the Bible is largely accurate to the originals. It would be absurd to think that it's wildly inaccurate in all ways, but there are definitely going to be inaccuracies. And so the question becomes, how relevant are they? But I could grant, we could just pretend you walked in with a Bible that is a perfect manuscript of all 66 books of the modern Bible. And all of them are original and signed And it would not change a thing about whether or not we have good reason to believe that they're true in what they say, right?
Yeah.
So then what difference does it make if the manuscripts are accurate and have a good chain of custody? They don't have a good chain of custody, and they are not manuscripts. But what difference would it make how accurate they are to the original when what we care about is, are they accurate to reality?
I mean, this is what I mean about the fear of it. It's so powerful, isn't it? I mean, the only other argument that was particularly useful against me, for want of a better way of describing it, it was, I've heard arguments that it is something like there's evidence that Jesus was actually resurrected, and I don't know, I haven't really looked up how true that is. I feel that
What do you mean you haven't looked up how true that is? How true could it be that a story? How true could it be that a story of a resurrection confirms a resurrection?
I think it's that I heard about. I can't remember who the historian is. There was something about. Is it TACIS, the Roman historian? He said something about Jesus being crucified, and then there were
Okay. So basically, you have not looked into any of this stuff at all and don't know any of it. And so my recommendation would be stop arguing with apologists, which is basically, I think, where Seth was going at the outset, that you are not ready. However, let's imagine that in addition to a perfect copy of every manuscript of every book of the Bible, we also had original handwritten testimony from 500 non-biblical sources that said that Jesus had been crucified and that the tomb was found empty a little less than 2 days later. Would that prove that Jesus was resurrected?
I mean, not really.
No, not at all. And even if we also had good reason to think that Jesus was in fact dead and Jesus was in fact raised from the dead, that still wouldn't tell us how or why it happened. It wouldn't confirm that he was divine. It wouldn't do anything at all to confirm that believing in him or that he died for our sins or that any of the other doctrines, all of those claims still have to have their own supporting evidence as well. This is the trick of apologists. They get you to buy into, hey, this seems possible. This seems reasonable. There's some people who said this. You don't want to call them liars, do you? And that leads to the slippery slope of now give me 10 or 20% of your earnings and live your life according to what my version of what I think Jesus wanted is.
And I suppose that just leads me to the final question I have, and that's, what do I do about this fear that I have? Because really, I suppose the invention of hell is the ultimate, comeback against reason,
sure.
I guess.
Which hell are you afraid of, and why?
Well, to be frank, any kind of eternal existence sounds like a hell.
Okay. So if you're afraid of every possible eternal existence, what should you do about that? Does it matter which God you believe in, and how do you pick? Do you seek the God that gets you into the best heaven, or the one that avoids the worst hell, or some combination? What is the criteria by which you determine your belief?
I mean, I would say that's a very good question, but it also doesn't sort of tell me how to overcome that fear.
If I may, I think much of the anxiety may come from the reality that, as you have said, you're not prepared for these conversations. Like if I don't know how to swim and I throw myself into the ocean, I'm going to be scared I'm going to drown. That's just a natural response. And it's another indicator that it is time for you to be a sponge, right? You are not a faucet. You're not a fire hose. You are a sponge. And I think when I first came out of the faith, I remember I was hot and heavy to go out and try to change the world. And I wanted to blow the whistle and sound the siren and tell everybody and blah, blah, and getting engaged. And I started much too soon. I needed a few years, really, to calm down and center myself, because I made a lot of really poor arguments. And I think if you'll slow your roll and moderate your expectations and sponge up information, this is an education moment, right? You never get to a destination, but there are answers to common apologetics challenges, stuff that Matt and I and others have heard 1,000 times. I made just a couple of quick notes off the top of my head of some of the standard stuff we hear. Science has proved creation. A riff on that is something called mitochondrial Eve. That's always been fun. Hitler was an atheist, which is proof that atheists have no morals and don't know what murder is or don't know it's wrong. Prophecies have been fulfilled. Most people can't really tell you which prophecies. We can't have morals without God. If you don't live forever, why bother? Scientist X believes in God, therefore God must be real. The evolution of the eye. How did something come from nothing? It takes more faith to be an atheist. They found Noah's Ark on some mountain somewhere. One of my favorites is only the fool. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God, as if that's an argument. Apologists have an arsenal of this stuff, and they are good at it. They're polished, they're smooth, and they are ready. You have absolutely no business engaging with these people if you're not comfortable, if you have anxiety, and if you are still on this journey. So be a sponge. Go out and learn some stuff, and only when you really feel comfortable, dip a toe in and kind of see how it goes. There's a lot to be learned out there, and all of us are still learning.
Okay, well, this is actually a lot more helpful than I expected. So, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, just
that's when I called in. It was going to be a waste of time. Damn it! But thank you for not wasting.
But yeah, just remember, you don't owe anybody an explanation for what you believe or why. You don't owe anybody an argument, and don't let them shift the burden of proof. Don't let them use emotional tools to exploit your fears, and just recognize, I don't know enough about reality yet to make any sort of decision about things beyond reality, so I should spend some time looking into that. And it makes me wonder, all the people who seem so cocksure that they know and understand how reality works, they keep failing to demonstrate it. I mean, in many ways, my job is one of the easiest, at least for me, that I could imagine. Because the burden of proof is on the people who are saying that there's a God, or saying that there's something supernatural, or saying that there are spirits and souls, or any number of things. They have the burden of proof. And as we saw from the previous caller, the best they can try and do once they've failed to even define terms or defend their position is to try to shift the burden of proof. And that's why they always, I mean, I did a video about this. This is the biggest debate mistake my opponents make. They make it about me. Well, you said, well, you said, well, you said, well, you think, are you denying? Are you denying? None of that matters. When scientists, for example, come in to demonstrate, or even in lighter sciences. So if somebody wants to make the case, for example, for the Q gospel as a potential source for Mark and Matthew and Luke, does a Q gospel exist, or is it a metaphorical construct that we've come up with to try to explain the similarities? All of those things are interesting points of discussion to try to figure out the foundation beyond the gospels. Was there this source? If somebody showed up, even amongst apologist scholars, and said, I'm going to be making a case for the Q gospel. Seth Andrews once said, they have already failed. The instant they do that, they've already failed. And when you point out that failure, if they say, well, are you saying that Seth has a better answer than the Q gospel? No, no. And that's not relevant either, and it doesn't make your case. This is the big bait and switch. Apologetics is all smoke and mirrors, whether they gave somebody a degree or not.
Yeah. Well, you've both been fantastic. Thank you.
Cheers.
Can I just
Thanks,
say, I'm breathing through a machine. I'm sorry I haven't sounded very clear to everyone.
Oh, you did fine.
I understood you perfectly well, and I don't know your reasons for breathing, but I'm thankful that you called and that you got something out of it, and I wish you the best.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, true story, Matt. And this just happened before we got into the weekend. I got an email asking if I would appear on Pastor Douglas Wilson's show. And you know Doug Wilson. He thinks it's like he's a straight up conservative. I think he's a Baptist. Got to be a Baptist. Women shouldn't hold positions of power. He once went on tour with Christopher Hitchens back in the day. They did a film about them debating side by side on a tour, I think, throughout the South. The film was called Collision. And it was a book as well, as the two went head to head. And I think they had a relatively cordial relationship. But in the days since, he has just been exposed as just a cretinous human being. He's just a terrible person. And so anyway, I got an invitation to appear on his show because he wants to talk with a materialist atheist, their words. And I've been staring at the email for 3 days, and I can't decide how I feel about it. Because part of me is like, if I appear on his show, they have all these opportunities to do whatever they want with the footage. They can slice and dice or whatever. What's the cost benefit for me? But at the same time, I'd kind of like to be in the room with Douglas Wilson and call out the bullshit. And I'm not sure what to do with it. I don't know. Do you ever have those conversations with yourself when you get a debate invite? You're like, this would be good, or they're going to go and they're going to slice and dice me for their own ends and make me look like an idiot. There's nothing I can do about it. You know, I don't know. I go back and forth on it.
I won't do an event at all unless the agreement is that I get an unedited copy of the footage to use as I see fit. So that if they slice and dice me, I can post the unedited footage. If they post the unedited footage, I don't ever need to post mine because I'm fine with it. It's like, here's the thing. I'm going to be doing a video. There's a person named Cliff Buell, and I just released a video on Friday because Cliff posted a video about me that was incredibly dishonest. Like, shockingly dishonest, saying that I was, is Matt apologizing for Hitler? And just completely missing the point of the discussion, and clear that he hadn't watched the entire thing, and accusing me of, I bet he imploded at the end of this debate, which just shows, A, you didn't watch the debate, because if I had imploded, you would have just said, this guy implodes at the end of the debate. But also, this was the debate I did on Justin's show with Glenn Scrivener in the UK. And it was, we had fun. We disagreed. We did so politely and strongly, and there was no implosion at all. And I even noted in that moment where I was playing devil's advocate on behalf of this, because we wanted to talk about secular ethics, I was like, somebody's going to clip this. And of course, Cliff or whoever did exactly that. So I posted the video basically, and I called it Cliff Buell lying for clicks and Christ, I think. Cliff saw the video and responded last night. And so I'm going to do a follow-up video because I don't think that this show is the only place where people should hear this, but I want to make sure you do. Here's Cliff's message to me. Hey, Matt, I don't think I would have ever seen this video, but it's strange how things end up popping up in front of us sometimes. It was a complete accident how I stumbled across it. I completely understand why you made this video and why you would continually refer to me as a liar or simply exploiting to make a profit. It sure looks that way. I had not seen the whole debate, and frankly, I didn't know of you or the gentleman you're debating. I found this clip through another creator, assumed it was credible, and there was my mistake. To be fair, by that same logic of assuming based off of a short clip, you've done the same as me. No, I haven't, Cliff, but we'll get into that in my response. Made the mistake of assuming I saw a quick opportunity to clip you out of context to make myself a profit. Oh, that's not an assumption. That is demonstrably what you did. You didn't bother to invest. Anyway, we'll get into that later. Continuing with what Cliff said. I can assure you there's plenty of content on the internet that is valid and honest that I don't need to spend my time clipping people out of context. I do think that is a scummy thing to do. I also agree that short clips don't allow for nuance, which can be frustrating even for myself in this short form YouTube space that I'm in. All that aside, I want to apologize for representing you in this manner, and I have removed the video from YouTube. My goal is never to spread false information about anyone or anything. I have gotten things wrong in the past, and I am sure that I will get them wrong again in the future. I hope you can forgive me for the damage that has already been done. You are right that I will not schedule a debate with you. I'm not a debater, and even if I'm convinced I'm right from a debate perspective, you would most likely crush me. I truly hope you can forgive both my error and ignorance. God bless you, Matt. I mean that, not saying it in a rage bait or sarcastically. I believe you, Cliff. I'll be putting together a quick video because now it looks like I'm responding to something that doesn't exist. I gratefully took it down. I accept your apology. I will forgive this instance, but I have my concerns about the world that we're living in where someone can see a representation of someone and without doing any research to their million subscribers decide that it's a good idea to go ahead and put up something that's tarnishing. And I wonder how long it would have stayed up if I hadn't posted that video. Would it have just lived out there forever with people going, "Ooh, I bet he rage quit right after he defended Hitler"? Because I'm not the one that defends Hitler. It's really strange. So, Cliff,
how long ago has it been since the Side 10 Brooking debate you did? I think that was either Nashville or Memphis. So I go out and I bring like a 5-camera rig and I shoot the debate. And you and I had this discussion in advance because neither one of us trusts Side 10 Brooking. First of all, he's a pre-sup and those people are maddening. He's one of those guys, well, is murder wrong? Yes. How do you know? It was one of those things. And you guys spent 2 hours on stage and I'm shooting the whole freaking thing. I drive all the way back home and I burn the midnight oil to get the footage edited. So I did a full multi-camera edit with, intros and packaging. And at the same time, I released a single feed uninterrupted video of the whole thing. So anybody anywhere could see that I did not edit anything out. This is what happened. And the multi-camera thing is just for style, just for interest. And I had those out within like 2 or 3 days. I mean, I was desperate because I was terrified that Cy was going to go and he was going to grab it and do who knows what he was going to do with his own footage.
They were doing a documentary.
Pardon me?
They were doing a documentary.
Well, I didn't see that he released anything except 6 months later or something. He released what looked like a Rocky movie trailer with an apologist and an atheist in a boxing ring. And there was that music. And then the apologist, the Jesus warrior, knocks the atheist out who falls to the... But it was a nothing video. It was a nothing release. Did he ever release the debate on his own that you heard about? Or did I take I was hoping to take the teeth out of whatever he was going to try. So
yeah, I think you did wonderfully on that front. I did not hear. I did not hear about anything other than that little, like the promoted thing, and I was not going to pay for it. I'm not going to pay to relive the experience. I already schooled him once. I don't need to do it again.
His crew had to come and plug in to my rig for sound because they were so ill prepared. They sheepishly walk up to me and they're like, hey, can we pop our XLR cables into your mixer because we can't get sound? And I was like, okay, because I know what's about to happen. Side Tim Bruggencate. What's that old Roy Mercer line? Whip your ass, and then, or I'll mop the floor with you, and then I'll whip your ass again for leaving a waxy yellow buildup. That's what happened. Literally, Side just got waxed. And at the end, I was like, "Hey, take the footage. You air it all because it's not going to help Side Tim." Is that guy? I haven't even heard his name in a while, but forgive me for the digression.
He's
But
not
we were
allowed.
talking
He's
about.
not allowed to be an apologist. Is why you have not heard his name. He committed some sexual sin that they were very unspecific about, and his church or mission organization, as a punishment, made it so that he's, I guess, not allowed to do this anymore, which is really weird because, like, for example, you and I are both board members and supporters of American Atheist. But at the end of the day, if American Atheist ever tried to tell me that I can't do what I do, they can go fuck them. I mean, it's just bizarre to be like, whoops, I had an affair, and then my church says I can no longer represent Jesus anymore.
Yeah. Well, what usually happens, it's the whole Jimmy Swaggart thing, or maybe the Hillsong thing is a better example. Oh, I have moral failings. I've sinned against thee, Lord, and you do your mea culpas, and then you disappear for about 8 minutes. And supposedly then once you've spent time with your family and sort of regathered yourself morally, and you've asked God to cleanse the slate, he shakes the etch-a-sketch, then you can reset and go back on the circuit. And that's normally the model. So
we'll see if he finds that path someday, but I haven't heard anything about him in ages. But
all right,
we have more callers, including a theist that I want to see if we can get to real quick. Brendan's a theist from somewhere in the United States, pronouns are he, him, and wants to know, is God just pretend? What do hosts mean by God? What would qualify as evidence? Oh, I see. The title of the show is God Just Pretend? Hey, Brendan, the answer to your first question is, I'm willing to go with whatever God you believe in, and then you can explain why it's not pretend. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Cool.
It's nice to talk to you guys. Hello, Matt. Hello, Seth.
Hey.
But yeah, I was actually a longtime listener of you, so I kind of understand your general viewpoints. The definition of God, so we'll just say the Christian God, for example, just a creator God.
Okay.
I also would like to kind of start with how reliable do you guys view science as an answer to questions like that, theological or philosophical questions?
How do I view science with regard to theological questions? Science has not established the truth of any theological claim that I'm aware of. Okay. And by the way, science doesn't make proclamations of truth. It creates tentative models that are the best current explanation for the available facts. And while your definition of God as the Christian God, the creator, is lacking because there's a bunch of different Christian gods, I'm willing to just go with it and see where we end up. But whether or not God exists, whether or not anything exists, is something that I think should be a scientific question if it is a detectable component of reality, and science hasn't confirmed a God yet. I don't know if that answers your question, but I tried.
It makes sense. I guess, how much do you put science as an aspect of your life that you follow for truth, and how reliable do you find it, considering that it's ever evolving as our knowledge evolves?
Science is the single most consistently reliable path to an accurate understanding that we have access to. I don't consider it completely reliable. It's moving towards increasing accuracy. The only thing that ever disproves science is more and better science. It's not like some religious claim comes along and goes, "Ha, we've debunked science." So when we find mistakes in thinking, those are the problems of human beings reaching conclusions in a flawed manner based on incomplete information. And that's why science puts forward tentative models that we then refine. So science is never making a proclamation of truth. I don't think you can be absolutely certain about anything, but I don't know of any methodology that is more consistently reliable in testable accuracy than the scientific methods.
Okay. In terms of reaching what I believe you would refer to as well-being, like the secular goal of achieving well-being for maximal well-being for humans, what do you think is the shortcoming in a religious mindset versus a secular mindset? And do you think being secularly minded does open up the door for interpretation of morality in a way that is dangerous, I guess?
Can I back
So
you up before we get there, Brennan? Forgive
yeah,
me, Matt.
no, go.
Do
Yeah,
you believe,
absolutely.
or do you hold that the scientific method is useful for theistic claims, or do you believe that theistic claims get a different set of rules?
I would say that theistic claims should have scientifically provable components to them, but overall, I wouldn't say that they are necessarily scientifically provable things, especially for historical claims.
Okay, hang on. Well, a theistic claim and a historical claim are two separate conversations, but I think what I'm concerned about is if someone then says there is, let's call it a supernatural element to the claim being made that is not testable by science,
Mhm.
that becomes hugely problematic, right? It exists, but you can't prove it exists. That's a problematic claim, is it not?
I would say it's problematic in the same way that feelings and thoughts like can be explained scientifically. Like I don't think that you can really explain feelings and emotions, particularly love and trust and forgiveness from people when it's not even really justified without bringing in an aspect that isn't really testable outside of, its neurochemicals. I mean, that's very vague and that doesn't really answer any questions ultimately.
What else would it be? Like if I'm using Occam's razor, a lot of people like to become dualist and they do the mind soul thing, right? Or the brain mind separation. But if it's
Yeah,
not
that's where I
my
would come
neurons
from,
finding,
argument wise.
if it's not my neurons firing, if it's not an evolved brain simply doing what an amazingly complex brain does, how reasonable is it to then say, well, because I don't fully understand how all of this, how the machine works, it must be some sort of an other that is immeasurable? You understand the problem, right?
I understand the problem, but I think that it's ultimately a problem that we're going to face with a number of different things. The existence of the universe, the formation of planets, and how stars developed. Those are all
We know that.
questions that
No. We
ultimately don't have
understand that.
answers even scientifically.
We
That model
understand.
changes constantly as well.
Astrophysicists, cosmologists actually have the models that show us how the elements of the universe, emerged from the singularity and how the cosmos came together. We have measurements and
Do you
have been
really?
able to replicate those in a computer. What I'm saying is we may not know what caused the singularity to begin with, but this idea that, well, we don't know, therefore it could be true, remains problematic. The scientific method is sort of the perfect that is the enemy, or the good that is, the perfect is the enemy of the good. It's imperfect because human beings are involved, but it's really the best that we have. And it becomes a problem when someone says, well, this may exist beyond testability. Then anybody could claim anything, could they not?
Uh, I feel. Repeat that point one more time. I'm not really sure I
If
understood.
someone makes or says these specific claims are beyond testability, that's a problem
Mhm.
because anybody could then claim anything, and supposedly they're not accountable to prove it, right?
Yeah, essentially, what's your reason
I
for
think I'm.
accepting some untestable claims while rejecting other untestable claims?
Well, I think that I would say that there's just things that are not going to be scientifically testable.
Okay.
I don't think we can
In
scientifically
what
test
way
the creation of
in
the
what
universe.
in
Or
what way are they testable?
I don't really think they're our position to test. Personally, I think that
Okay.
they're just
So
things that we can
if
observe.
something
We
is
can't explain them, though.
if something is untestable, so now you have a claim about the origin of the universe and it's untestable. And you have another claim that is also untestable. Why would you accept one of those claims over the other?
Um, I think that's a different answer from every person. I would say that I've felt
But I'm talking to
experiences
you.
that. Hmm?
But I'm talking to you. I'm
Oh,
literally
yeah.
asking you. How did you determine which untestable claim you're okay with accepting?
I would determine that based off of its effect on my life, really. I've felt things that gave me a sense of a higher power and a bigger reason for existence itself. That leads me to believe a creator more so than trying to theorize about how, the universe was created during the Big Bang or how planets evolve and stuff like that. I'm not concerned with that.
So your
Because it's not really.
criteria, so your criteria for untestable claims is whatever feels best to you. Is that a good way to figure out what's true?
No. No.
Cool. So why do you do that?
I'm not
then?
really.
Why do you not care if your beliefs are true?
I do care if my beliefs are true to a certain extent. I want to stay on the topic of the Big Bang. We only have one of one. There is no testing that. We can't observe planets developing outside of like distance that's incomprehensible to human minds. So, I mean, that kind of puts a monkey wrench in the cog, so to speak, in terms of understanding things, because it's just something we're not going to understand. But yet we purport to know these things about how stars form and what's inside the cores of planets.
I'm sorry that you don't understand the basics of science and what we do and don't understand and to what extent. But the reality is that we know a great deal more about those things, but science isn't making proclamations of certainty about any of those things. So we have the mathematics that we can use to model universes and everything else. Do you have anything even remotely comparable for that, for your gut feels about untestable claims about your magical origin of the universe?
No, I think the origin of the universe is inherently magical.
Hang on. You think the origin of the universe is inherently magical. Why?
It's a miracle, yeah. Because it's statistically impossible.
No, you can't use statistics. You can't use statistics. How many universes we have? You've already sorted this. You just finished saying we have a one of one. It's untestable. There's nothing to compare it to. Therefore, you cannot have statistics that show. By the way, if you have statistics, I'd love to hear them and how you determine that a magical God that you have no way to demonstrate and that is untestable is somehow statistically more likely than a natural process that you also don't understand.
I wouldn't be able to do either of those things.
Yeah, so why are you a God believer then? This is why I can't believe in a God. I can't say belief isn't a choice.
Fair enough.
You're either convinced or you're not. And so I'm not blaming you for being convinced when you don't have a good reason. The thing I would blame you for is acknowledging that you don't have a good reason and then not seeing a problem with continuing to believe in the absence of good reason. Because you could line up 500 different God claims that are all similarly untestable, that all are proposed answers to the origin of the universe, and you would have no justification for picking one over another, and yet you have.
Well, I would say the truth of the moral and the claims of the book. I think, and when I
what about
think
the truth
of the Bible,
moral?
I think of the Gospels of like
this
what
is a question
Jesus
you
said.
asked
I think
me.
of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
This is a question you asked me back then. You talked about secular morality and why I thought it was superior to theistic models. And so I have a very simple answer to that. Theistic models, at least the one that you seem to be advocating for, are focused on things that aren't demonstrably true or real, like a soul and an afterlife. Secular morality focuses on this life and true benefits in this life and tries to determine how to make this life better, instead of worrying what you need to do in this life to get a better special afterlife. That's why I find one of the many reasons I find secular morality superior. But there's plenty of other reasons when you get into the specifics of what's in the Bible, where it doesn't hold different people of different sexes to be equal, different people of different races to be equal, when it has different rules, when it endorses slavery. All of those things are incredibly problematic and inconsistent with a good society. And so I have big problems with the Bible's view on morality. But even if I agreed with the Bible's morality 100%, That wouldn't in any way demonstrate there's a God, would it?
Not necessarily, no.
No, not even not
I
necessarily.
would like to ask
Not at
though,
all.
what's your qualms
Not
with
just not
Jesus'
necessarily.
teaching specifically?
Hang on, not necessarily. Not at all.
Sorry.
There's nothing about agreeing with moral principles in the Bible that demonstrates that a God is real. And yet you, when pushed back to the point where you had no justification for your first irrational belief, went with, but you find the morality of the Bible compelling. Well, that's not sufficient by your own admission to conclude a God exists.
I mean, but if you follow the Bible, obviously you're going to come to the conclusion that God exists.
No, you don't. It's entirely possible for you to accept moral precepts in the Bible. And even if you come to the conclusion that a God exists, my point was that's not a justified conclusion. I don't care that people who are irrational and willing to accept things without evidence will continue to accept irrational things without sufficient evidence. That's not my problem. That's your problem.
Okay.
Hey, Brandon.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Let's kick this down the road to where I think you were trying to go, and you tell me if I understood you correctly. Was one of your assertions going to be that if someone believes in a God or they hold to religious precepts, that they are more apt to be happier and have more fulfilled lives? In some cases, if someone finds comfort in the idea of God, that when they die, it's not over, but they will go to heaven, or there may be another jewel in their crown if they do good deeds. If they are motivated in some way by what might be an unfounded or false faith, but it makes them happy and it motivates them to do well. Is your question, hey, would there then be utility in holding a kind of God or religious belief? Was that your question?
That would have definitely been a point that I would have touched on at a certain point. I do think that if you are following it for some eternal reward, that's completely shallow. And I would disagree with doing that. I would say that from my personal experience, a year back in Christianity, that I have had much more of an understanding of what it means to sacrifice time and effort for others and brotherhood, kinship, and I had a very, Trump sucks. America's an absolute hellhole. It's a capitalistic nightmare. I'm a bit of a little amalgamation of liberal ideas, but I like the sacrifice of self to others that the New Testament brings.
Okay, well, I think where I'd like to go is, and this isn't mentioning Hitch again, he used to ask this question. Can you name for me any of those right and moral actions with religion or Christianity that you could not do without? I mean, to be charitable and to feel a sense of kinship with your fellow human beings, to find a group, a tribe, a club, a family in some way, to go make the world a better place, to enjoy the best parts of being alive. Could you do those things without a God belief?
Honestly, yeah, Hitchens was nailed it with that one. Like that's a really good point. It is. Yeah, you can do that without having God in your life.
So
But,
if the evidence points to Christianity is not founded, it contradicts itself, it is historically, scientifically, and morally debunked, we can cast it aside, right? The question, is it true or is it not true? I think whether it's convenient or not, no matter how it makes us feel, the question, is it true, really should be near the beginning of all of those conversations. Because I think not only can we achieve the best parts of being alive without all the religious stuff, but often it's much better because we're doing so more grounded in reality without having all the superstitious baggage. Would that be fair?
I would say that if you reach that conclusion, I understand. That's what I would say.
If I reached which conclusion? That
If you reach the
Christianity has been
conclusion
debunked?
that without the superstitious baggage, so to speak, as you put it, like the feeling of, yes, I'm under sin, and yeah, I need to die to self, and all glory to God, and everything that's good that happens is God. I can understand how that would get somebody to think like, oh man, I'm taking none of the credit. I feel like a piece of shit because I'm just wallowing in sin and I'm this sinful creature cast down from the garden. But
No, I'm not talking
What is
about that.
I
sin?
don't view it
At
that
this
way
point, hang
personally.
on. I'm not talking about that. I'm speaking about the people who are, I'll call it self-medicating. The fears of mortality and the desire to have a sense of purpose that they may not be generating organically for whatever reason, right? They have embraced a fiction because it feeds them in some way. We understand the medicating qualities of many religious beliefs. We understand that it fills gaps
Mhm.
in a lot of ways. It has been a crutch. Some people would say a coping mechanism. I'll call it a crutch in many ways. But it doesn't mean it's a net positive, and it certainly doesn't mean it's true. If it makes me happy, if I think I'll live and go to heaven, if it makes me maybe more charitable to other people, that has nothing to do with whether or not the claims of the Bible and the foundational dogmas of Christianity have any merit whatsoever. It just, again, comes back to how we feel. And you can see how that's a problem, right?
I can't see how that's a problem. Yeah, I would get into the historicity of the Bible and stuff like that if this was the case, and I would wonder what because you mentioned that you thought the Bible was, from your perspective, the Bible was historically and even morally
Scientifically
debunked.
and
So
morally.
what would you say historically?
Do I think that
What would you say
humankind
historically debunks it?
originated with a cosmically conjured dirt man and rib woman in a garden with talking snakes? Do I think there's any reason to believe an anonymously written book that makes that claim? And the fact that the Bible, I mean, still in Genesis 1 and 2. I'm not going to get into the book. That's a whole other
Yeah.
conversation. But I'm saying you are quoting to us a book that talks about 1,000-year-old humans, flying chariots of fire, blood magic, curses, a deity that was fathered via ghost sex through an unwed teenager so that the offspring could be turned into a bloody meat pinata to rescue us from the hell that God created. And then you get into Revelation with 7-headed dragons. Yes, we have good reason to believe that none of this is true. And we have a lot of reason to know that it's debunked, often borrowed mythology that has done great harm, and we're better off without it. Forgive me, Matt, I've been monopolizing the clock.
No, it's fine.
I'll sit back and do your thing. So
I'm just wondering, Brennan, you brought up this notion of sin. From your view, like, I reject the very concept of sin. I don't recognize that there's thought crime. I don't recognize that I can hurt or wound a God. And so if the issue is just, I have actions that are inconsistent with what somebody else thinks a God would like me to do, I don't care if they label that sin. I want to know why something is actually wrong. And so if they're going to point to the person who supposedly sanctions slavery or accepts Jephthah's sacrifice or creates a son in order to slaughter him because he likes the smell of barbecue in the Old Testament, or makes pronouncements about slavery being okay and that slaves should obey their masters and that we don't allow women to be equal or speak in church or own property. The various bits of confusion in there. When I look at the book, and the book is all I have now, I don't see anything that tells me this is true. I see things that are clearly scare tactics to be like, hey, that's a nice soul there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it, wouldn't it? You really probably should do this. Except that of all the concepts within Christendom, the notion of a soul is for me the single most obviously, virtually scientifically demonstrated dead concepts, because every single thing that we attribute to a soul is either an identifiable function of a brain or not demonstrably real. And so we get back to you're taking these things that are ultimately untestable and injecting them in order to color. It's like you're making a stained glass window, and the lines that you're putting in there are drawing the picture you want, and then you go and cut out the pieces out of the Bible to fit and make this picture, and you don't bother looking at all the scraps you've left behind, and then want to claim that the scrap pile is important and good and essential to understanding salvation. And I can't get that. And so when I asked you, do you care about whether or not it's true? You're like, I don't remember your exact answer, but it was like sometimes or some things in some way. I don't get that. Why would you ever pick something comforting over something true if the issue was, I don't know how to get to the truth, so I'm just going to go with what feels good? Is there some gun at your head forcing you to make a decision right now? Why isn't it okay to just say, I don't know, let me keep looking?
I do think that I can say I don't ultimately know. I don't think anybody can ultimately know, because ultimate knowledge means something specific, very specific. I don't know. When it comes to truth, I don't really know what exactly is a verifiable truth. Like, what is 100% concrete verifiable truth that I can't see, touch, taste, and feel? Where do I make that distinction in things that are just like even 40, 50 years ago? Like, how do I know those things are true?
Do you think it's true that you exist?
Yes.
Cool. Do you think it's true that I exist?
Yes.
Do you think you and I share, that it is true that you and I share an existence?
Yes.
Cool. So we've skipped past all of the real problems in philosophy, the problem that there's no solution to hard solipsism. We've skipped past any notion of a matrix. We could be wrong, but at a minimum, you're beginning with the proposition that it is true. And I would say that of the things, so there are varying levels of confidence in each position as to how likely it is to be true. And I would say at the top level, along with René Descartes, your own existence is a thing that is probably the peak of true, even if it's not absolutely true. It's as close to absolutely true as possible. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, probably.
Cool.
It's the most tangible thing.
And then something like the Earth is an oblate spheroid that rotates on an axis and then orbits a sun. That's probably not as highly confident, or you're probably not as high in your confidence that is true as you are about your own existence. But I would hope that you would consider those things to just be true. Like, we may not know everything about them, but any sensible person looking at reality with the available facts and evidence right now would say it is true that the Earth spins on a tilted axis and orbits the sun. Are we in agreement there?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Cool. So is it true that the dollar bill in my wallet is fiat currency whose value fluctuates, but it does have a real value at any given moment with regard to trading in a situation?
Yeah.
Cool. So now when you say you don't know if anything's true or what's true or how you can tell, we've already now agreed upon an incredibly strong truth. I think, therefore I am, proving that even if the world is not real, at least you exist. You don't know how you're being fooled. Then I think I'm going to operate as if the world is real. And within that framework, we can also say it's true that this happens and it's true that this happens. Within that framework, what position do I hold that you would say is not true or not identifiably true? Because you definitely hold positions that I would say are either not true or not verifiably true. And I don't know why that is. I think is the crux right here, because I'm okay with varying degrees of confidence in a belief. Like, for example, I don't really have a belief about quantum mechanics because I don't understand it well enough.
Yeah,
And
I don't think quantum mechanicists know that.
yeah.
Quantum
And
physicists,
so
my bad.
yeah, so we can put things on this massive spectrum. And for me, if I put my existence at the thing I'm most confident about, and let's say quantum physics is the thing I'm least confident about, but I'm willing to go with the consensus of experts, I'm less confident about everything that is proposed as supernatural, because there's zero demonstration that it does exist, that it could exist, that it interacts with reality in any detectable way. And so where I might shrug off quantum physics or quantum mechanics in some senses as potentially untestable or whatever, and I shouldn't, because I don't know it well enough. I shouldn't even talk about it. But while I might put that in that bucket, at least there's a there, even if it's wrong. I have no way of assessing anything supernatural, and I don't know how anybody does. And what I find happening, and what you kind of did, Brendan, is I get it. I can't test the supernatural, but I still think it's there. And that's what I struggle with. So that's where, why is that?
I think it's more to lend to the credence of like eyewitness accounts and stuff like that, because that's mainly the type of anecdotes.
Who's
kind of what
witnessed
you
the
have for
supernatural?
supernatural experiences.
Who has witnessed the supernatural? How do you confirm that they've witnessed the supernatural?
Oh, you haven't watched Ghost Adventures, Matt? Come on now. They have supernatural experiences all the time.
Okay, jokes aside.
I'm joking. Yeah.
I
people
figured
say
you
that.
were
Like
joking.
near-death
This conversation
experiences
has
would be a
gone too well.
good example.
What's a good example? What was a good
I would
example? I'm
say
sorry?
near-death experiences.
Okay. What about a near-death experience is supernatural?
Being outside of your body and like observing different
How do
events
you
going on
know
in the
that?
room.
How do you verify that anybody who reports being out of their body was in fact out of their body and not just perceiving themselves as out of their body?
If they can refer specific things that can go be verified in the real world, which has been like, conversations in the room, readings on a clipboard, shoes on the roof.
Not just conversations in the room, because see, this is the problem with near-death experience studies. We've done them. And it's absolutely trivial for somebody to report a conversation in the room because they're in the room. What we've done to try to test this is to put messages on top of things where they would have to float outside of their body and look down to something that their body could not see and read a message there. And to date, that has never been demonstrated.
They've done like actual tests. Like, did they like just kill people and bring them back, or?
No. They went into hospital operating rooms and staged messages up on top of equipment and lockers, specifically so that if a reported instance in one of those theaters actually occurred, they would have a reference. And to date, nobody's even passed that test. And so the sorts of things you get out of near-death experiences are stories that could easily be viewed as, this is a brain deprived of oxygen, not functioning correctly, that is losing time, and when revived, when resuscitated back to a normative conscious state, creates a narrative to describe what happened. But there's nothing about it that in any way demonstrates they left their body. And even if they did leave their body, how do you know that's supernatural?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily supernatural, just that it indicates that we have something inside of ourselves that's separate from our physical being, if they're observing other things.
Except it doesn't indicate that. Except it does not indicate that. And once again, I had asked for an example of anybody who's witnessed the supernatural. And you went to an example that does not witness the supernatural. And to the extent that it could possibly demonstrate or be a witness to something extraordinary, it hasn't even been able to demonstrate that part.
Okay. I mean, because there are people that have experiences with ghosts and stuff like that, but I don't think freaking ghosts are real.
So there are people.
That's not a good
listen
point.
to what you just said. You said there's people who have had experiences with ghosts, but you don't think ghosts are real. So they didn't have experiences with ghosts, according to you. They had experiences that they reported as ghosts. And similarly, they didn't have an out-of-body experience from my perspective. They had an experience that they reported as an out-of-body experience. We would need to confirm the ghost. We would need to confirm the out-of-body experience. And so far, we haven't been able to do that. And what's really weird to me is if, in fact, there is a God, and God's existence is real, and a rational belief in that existence is contingent on accepting something like the supernatural, why would God not make the supernatural testable?
I don't know. I don't have an answer to
Join the club.
that. What's your view on something like the Shroud of Turin? Just out of
Shroud of Turin is a fraud. It's an obvious fraud that's been demonstrated to be a fraud multiple times for decades.
And the question beyond that
I remember them saying
the question beyond that has to be, Brandon. The question beyond that has to be, why in the world would God leave a kind of paper trail, and why would that include a magical cave cloth that wasn't discovered for 13 centuries? You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, it would. Well, from my perspective, it would be a photograph of the resurrection. I don't think
you don't know who. Even if it was
arguable
determined that it was
evidence
an
if it was
actual
true.
guy, when the apologists that I debated or discussed the shroud with on Piers, I remember at one point he pulled out a crucifixion spike that was dated back like 2,000 years that some archaeologist found, pulled out of the ground, and he held it in front of the camera as if he had actually produced something. And my first thought was, what the hell is that? Like, thousands of people were crucified by ancient Rome. I mean, that's a spike. You have no idea who that belonged to, what it was used for. And so let's say the outline of the shape of a man turned out to be an actual man. How in the world could anyone demonstrate that it was the Christ? Even if it was Jesus and there was a man named Jesus that the Christ myth was built upon, how would you know that it proved that Jesus was a supernatural creature? There are so many problems with the shroud argument. We can go point by point by point. At the end of the day, the desire to believe, eyewitness accounts, there's something out there that's untestable, therefore it's valid. All of these things really fall away. I think the scientific method is really the best way that we have to try to navigate this world as best we can. And the second someone says, well, it's untestable and it exists out there, I think that's a real problem.
I understand. Yeah, I understand. I understand and respect your viewpoint. Fair enough.
So
Much
I would also
appreciated.
recommend you look into Joe Nickel, because Joe was one of the world's foremost experts on the shroud and wrote a number of books and papers debunking it in various ways, not the least of which is the absurdity of the image and how the top of the head on the front and the top of the head on the back seemed to touch in a way that would suggest Jesus's head was pointy, if that was in fact Jesus. But one of the aspects of this is the question I ask about making the supernatural testable, and to your credit, you're like, yep, I get it. Let's move on to the next thing. What about the Shroud of Turin? Let's assume for a second that we didn't have any way to test the Shroud of Turin, which, by the way, the church has consistently avoided presenting it for proper scientific testing, only little fragments of it on occasion because they consider it a holy relic. And every time they've submitted the fragments for testing, what we found is further evidence of a fraud. I think 13th century, but I'm not completely sure because it's been a while since I studied that. But let's imagine for a second that the Shroud of Turin is almost certainly a real artifact from a 1st century burial. What could it possibly demonstrate? Could we even show that that was Jesus?
My argument to that would be, and this is coming from a place of just reading stuff on the internet, but people have explained it as it looks like a photo negative. From my perspective as a photographer, you would only get that kind of imprint on a cloth with a really bright light. There's only one person that was ever resurrected through a blinding light. that I can think of
Really?
in history.
How do you know that? How do you
Jesus.
know that Jesus was resurrected, or that it was through a blinding light, or that image is consistent with that? Because my question was, how do you know it's Jesus? And you're going, oh, well, Jesus is the only one that we ever heard about, and we can just infer that it was a bright light? Was there somebody in the tomb that reported a bright light?
No, I'm still stuck on, I read it on the internet. That's why I'm still stuck there. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do. I was saying that the way it's been described is a photo imprint, a photo negative imprint on a cloth.
Described by who?
That would indicate, like I said, Matt, I've read stuff on the internet. I don't know.
Congratulations.
People that have
you
said
should
that
read
they've
stuff
tested it
that's
too.
not on the
These
internet
are
as
like
well.
theological, these are like Christian theologians and stuff. People that have said they've tested it.
So first of all, you need to go do some more research, because it is not like a photo negative. But I'm bending over backwards here, Brendan. I'm going to go ahead and grant you, for the sake of this argument, that it is in fact a first century burial thing, even though it doesn't look anything at all like a first century burial cloth, or how a burial cloth would be there, or anything else. And we're going to go ahead and grant you that it was a photo negative of a dead body being resurrected by a bright light. How do you show it was Jesus?
Bible.
How does the Bible show that the Shroud of Turin, which wasn't discovered or found until long after, is actually Jesus?
It shows that Jesus was wrapped in a burial cloth, placed in a tomb, and resurrected in that tomb.
Hey, if I find $100 bill on the sidewalk and you show me your pay receipt to show that you got paid $100, does that mean it's yours?
That's a good point.
I know. I've done this
I
for
may
a
steal
while.
that. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I may steal that.
The issue here is, even if I grant everything, there is no way to show that it's Jesus. And that's a problem. By the way, there's no way to even show that Jesus existed. I'm not a mythicist, but I agree that the burden of proof has not been established. I'm just willing to go with it because it's easier than making that argument. But if all of this were true, wouldn't God make sure there was absolutely no room for question that the shroud was real and definitely Jesus? Why can't God even do that? God doesn't seem to give Christians even a smidgen of evidence, and yet they seem to see evidence everywhere. Ooh, here's a burial shroud, which the scientists say was a late forgery, but it looks enough like this that I can just go with it's probably the one from the Bible. Well, cool story, but that's not how we get to truth.
Right. And I mean, I would say, and a lot of Christians would say, that it's like you feel it within yourself. It's in God's laws imprinted on your heart. That's not provable, though. So I know
full
that's not
circle, baby. Full circle. Yeah. We're back to feelings. We could do this all night, Brandon.
I appreciate that, though, Brandon. I appreciate the fact that, first of all, thank you so much for calling and for interacting on this. And if you come up with better arguments and better evidence, or if you find that when you go research stuff like the shroud, you might find that you were relying on bad sources. But I at least appreciate the fact that you seem to recognize, at the end of the day, there's no way to demonstrate this, and yet it feels right to you, and that's good enough. And all I can say is, it's definitely not good enough for me, and it could never be good enough for me that it feels right to you. But even when something feels right to me, I still question that. Do I have good reason? Because many times in the past, something has felt right and correct to me, and it's turned out that I was wrong. And so one of the problems about doing something like this is that if you're wrong, you still think you're right. And so being wrong feels exactly like being right. And so if you have the wrong answer, what motivation do you have to go looking for the right answer if you think the wrong answer is the right one?
That's very true. People need to think about that. That's true.
Cool. We're going to move on. We got some other calls, Brendan, but I appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great night.
So I have a few thoughts. First of all, I think somebody in the chat said, HWJS, how was Jesus shaped? I just think that's brilliant. The other thought that I had was when he was asking about the NDE experiment with the placards that were placed over the lights, and he's like, "Did they just kill them?" And I thought to myself, what a scenario that would be. Hey, would you like to participate in this study, Bob? Here's $100 bill. Sign your name. Thanks. It just wasn't tracking. But the last and more serious point I wanted to make is that the question of the soul remains a scientific question. If the supernatural was interacting with the natural, if there was a soul interacting with the physical brain mind, there would be a point of interaction that science could see and measure. I assert that I think that a soul, the existence of a soul, remains a scientific question for that reason.
Yep. I think that. So here's the curious thing about the supernatural or claims of the supernatural. If you want to claim that there's something that exists outside of the natural world, the very next question is, how would you demonstrate that? And if the thing that exists outside of the natural world cannot interact with reality, the natural world, in any detectable way, then its existence is indistinguishable from its non-existence. That which doesn't exist and that which doesn't interact with reality functionally look the same from our perspective. So in order for it to make sense, we must be talking about something that can interact with reality in a detectable way. And so now it doesn't matter if the origin is outside the universe, just like it doesn't matter if you and I are sitting in the living room and we hear a noise. It doesn't matter if the noise came from outside the house. We heard the noise. There was a manifestation that was in with us, and we can test that. We can pull out a recorder. We can see what's going on. He joked about the ghost hunters, but these are what the ghost people are trying to do. They're like, ooh, here's these phenomenon. You may never be able to show that the phenomenon itself actually ties to the supernatural, but they can't even demonstrate the phenomenon. Like there's no there. There's absolutely nothing that they can show. And why is it that a God set up a scenario where he gave you a brain, he gave you processes of logic and reason and evidence to better understand the whole of this world, and then put the most important questions and the ones that people are most sincerely devoted to and the ones that they would kill and destroy the lives of their neighbors over into a realm that is beyond question, beyond investigation, and beyond scrutiny. Otherwise, people are running around claiming to detect the undetectable. And that, to me, I'm just like, wait a minute. You know that Jesus Christ is Lord. How? Well, I just do. Well, that's like the first caller. Congratulations, you've now earned a master's in theology too. Because if it's just obvious, why did you have to go get a degree? Got a degree in nothing. All right. Magpie is pronouns of she, they. Magpie is calling about discussing the benefits of allowing cognitive dissonance regarding the supernatural. Well, that fits perfectly in. Thank you for waiting. Hey, Magpie, how can we help?
Thanks for taking my call. I'm a bit nervous, but we're getting on with it. I was listening to your previous call, and actually, it ties in really well, because the other one that I'd like to raise is, how do you handle thinking logically and trying to live your way as a rational skeptic person while still having personal experience of, I don't know if supernatural is the right word, because I agree that if something exists in the world, then it is part of the world and is therefore natural, but beyond conventional models of material existence, I guess.
Are you asking how we explain that which doesn't currently have an explanation?
No, I'm asking how you would handle, and I'm specifically talking more to Matt with this. Sorry that I'm not as familiar with your content, but I've seen in other videos of Matt, you were a Christian, and
Yeah.
you.
So is Seth. But go ahead.
studied further and became, sorry?
Ignore me. I just clarify what you're asking so I can understand it, please. Thanks.
How do you handle experiencing things that feel supernatural and are
I've never
part of your
experienced anything
daily
that feels
reality
supernatural.
while knowing that they can't be true?
No, no,
So
no.
first
But
of all,
if you feel the swell in your heart and you interpret it as a move of the spirit, but cognitively you know that there's no reason that it would be the move of the spirit, how do you navigate overcoming the emotional response? I think, am I understanding your question, Magpie?
Yeah, something like that. Or should we overcome the emotional response if it gives value to our life?
I only care if something is true. Not only do I not know that something isn't or can't be supernatural, I've never experienced anything that I thought could or was supernatural.
Oh, I did. When I was a believer, there was a lot of stuff I believed was coincidences were miracles. God's son brought someone into my life when I came out of a worship service and I felt the goosebumps. It was a move of the spirit. I assigned a supernatural agency to a lot of stuff in my life. It didn't mean it was real, but I
Yeah,
felt
that
that
I
it was
did.
real.
Yeah. No, that sort of thing I recall, but I've never experienced something where I'm like, oh, that feels supernatural, even though I know it can't be, because A, I don't know it can't be, and B, I don't know what the supernatural feels like. When I was younger, the things that I would feel would be described to me as supernatural in origin, and I accepted that until I looked into it, and then I found out, oh, I have no justification for thinking it's supernatural. And since that moment, I mean, I thought you were asking about me now. As an adult skeptic now, I have never had a single experience where I went, ooh, that feels supernatural, because I have no idea what that would feel like. All I have are experiences where, like, I don't know what's causing that.
When I'm hearing that, I'm thinking about very sort of daily life occurrences in
Okay.
regard of I walk in a room and I feel that I'm not alone. Or there is something in my sensory experience that says someone has sat on the bed that I'm now trying to sleep in.
That's never
And
happened to me.
okay,
I wonder
But
if you're I think you're maybe ahead of the game. In your mind, you're already thinking, well, wow, I feel something, but I'm not sure that the feeling that I have is necessarily rational. So why am I feeling it? What would prompt the feeling? Is there any reason to believe that there would be something causing this feeling that is an external agent? I mean, you're already asking all the right questions. I think what I'm hearing is then it has to become a force of will to understand that what I'm feeling isn't necessarily what is. Our emotions are roller coasters. Perception is far from perfect. Conditioned response, our own flawed human senses. But the fact that you're already asking the questions, well, whoa, I'm feeling something and it sure feels real sometimes. What do I do with that? I think that's an interesting and necessary step in that journey. You're already beginning to challenge what you feel. And I think that's a net plus. I could be wrong.
I'm just wondering, though,
I'm
Magpie, because you described this as like an everyday experience and then gave an example of something that is completely foreign to me. Like, I have never walked in a room and felt, ooh, there's some presence here, or somebody sat on this bed. Um, and yet you're describing that as like an everyday experience. So I'm wondering if I'm missing out on something.
I don't know. For me, it's a very daily experience. I have, as a stupid example, I have two real cats, but I live with what feels like at least another invisible cat, which is very silly because I know there are no invisible cats, but I have this very clear sensory perception of having another cat-like creature quite often around. So if my house
What
burns
sense
down
of,
and I need to rescue my cats, I won't ask anyone to go rescue the invisible cat because I'm aware that that cat is probably not real, or at least I'm not expecting anyone to believe that it's real because I said so. That's not how rationality works, and it's a weird thing to do. But
What
every
senses of
day there is
yours?
another layer to reality that I experience, and I
Okay.
can't stop experiencing it by telling myself that it's irrational.
Have you? I apologize in advance. I don't say this to be insulting. Have you sought therapy and psychological counseling and treatment? Because when you say that you have an invisible cat that you know isn't real, but you detect it with sensory apparatus, I have no idea what senses are detecting a cat, but how have you ruled out mild or strong delusions?
Well, for one, it's not ever been to the point where, like, the threshold of something being a clinical disorder is that it needs to be disruptive to my life, and it has never been.
No,
And
no,
I,
no, no, no.
Mhm,
It's entirely possible for you to have
mhm,
psychiatric conditions that provide mild delusions that aren't a major disruption to your life.
mhm. On the other hand, I think that I am mostly, or I am able to tell that it is experienced in a different way. I think that, funny enough, I have a very bad um, visual imagination. There's this test that people do with how vividly you can imagine an apple, and I can't. I see nothing. But people who do have visual imagination can at least told me that they see something, but they know that they're not seeing it with their eyes. So a lot of the time when I feel these things, or when I encounter a natural phenomenon, I like going on hikes and stuff, and I'm like, okay, this is a natural phenomenon that I know the science behind, but I also feel, or I experience as if there is someone, some, I don't know, fairy creature or something there, right behind that rock or something that I ascribe to whatever is happening to. And
How would you go about testing what you think you're experiencing to find out if it's real?
I wouldn't mind testing, or I don't know if testing would make it stop feeling real.
That's not what I asked.
So
If you
I
have
didn't
a
understand the question.
psychological condition, testing may not make it stop feeling real. But you haven't been tested for that. You're basically diagnosing yourself based on things you read on the
Oh,
internet and going
mhm,
with, hey, this feels real, and I don't know that testing it would make it stop feeling real, which has nothing to do with the issue here. You're
mhm,
describing things and you're asking, how do I deal with something? Clearly, I don't deal with what you deal with. I don't know how
mhm.
you're detecting this cat, um, or what this cat does, or why it feels that way. And it may not be a big deal. But if the issue is, hey, Matt, what do you do with the other 73 voices in your head? I don't have that experience. And I don't have an invisible cat or fairies in my garden. Um, I've never walked into a room and felt a presence that wasn't like an actual person in there that I saw or bumped into or smelled or whatever. Um, so I think part of it is you're recognizing that you feel things that are curious that you don't have an explanation for, and you ascribe the supernatural to them either as a placeholder so that you can talk about it, um, but you have no justification and recognize that you don't have any justification for saying it's supernatural. As a matter of fact, you seem to say it can't be, which is further than I go, because I don't know that the supernatural can't exist. I am pretty strongly confident that nobody's ever come up with a way to test for the supernatural. So I don't have the experiences that you do, nor do I understand them. But at a minimum, I'd say if you can't find a way to test it, um, the next step, if this is something that feels real, which you are convinced isn't real, is to go seek professional help, because while it may be incredibly unlikely that you have some severe condition that warrants, action, there may be a diagnosis and there may or may not be potential treatment that resolves the issue of feeling a presence when you walk into the room or thinking you have an extra cat that's not visible. I don't know, but I mean, I don't think you can just rule that out based on your feelings.
I get that. I honestly do not expect the experience that I described to be that unusual. So this is not where I sort of imagine things would go.
Okay.
Also, the second part of it is that I feel that there is a lot of value or benefit to my life in not trying to tell myself that I should stop reacting to reality because it doesn't make sense.
I'm not sure I followed that last little bit, but that might be my fault. You said you're not sure that you should tell yourself to stop reacting to reality because it might not exist?
I'm saying that if there is something that I experience as 50 or 60 or kind of real, and I know that it doesn't feel right, say that, I don't know, the presence in my room is scary and I can tell it to go away in, I don't know, kind of a ritualistic or magical fashion. Having the tools to deal with the scary thing from inside that reality rather than telling myself that it's not true is a kind of benefit.
No, you don't have to tell yourself that it's not true. That's what I'm saying is you've reached a conclusion that X is not possible. And I don't see how that conclusion is warranted either. My conclusion is not the supernatural is not real. It is no one has ever demonstrated that the supernatural is real or any way to verify it's real. And so you can operate as if it's not real, but you shouldn't be reaching the conclusion that it is in fact not real or not possible, because you have no way of confirming that.
I guess a way of confirming it is sharing those experiences with someone else and seeing that
No.
I'm at least in the minority
How
of
would
something.
your experience with somebody else confirm that the supernatural is either real or not real? The plural of anecdote is not data. You don't just get to collect a whole bunch of people's stories and find the point of agreement and then extrapolate that to say, our agreement here confirms the supernatural is real, or our agreement here confirms the supernatural isn't real. There is no path to that from anecdote.
Right.
Got to find a way to test it.
I possibly try and find a way to test it, but this is still, I should probably still go over the bump of this is unusual.
Yep. I don't even remember the last time, and I might be weird. Don't get me wrong, I am weird. How weird I am is another story, because there are people who might look at the two of us, Magpie, and say, Magpie is the weird one because they think that they have an invisible cat. And it may be, and they walk into a room and feel a presence. And it may be that is the normal thing that happens to so many people with much more regularity. And that it's me who is the weird one for not experiencing those sorts of things. I already recognize that I am weird because I've taken steps in evaluating things that the overwhelming majority of people don't seem to even attempt to do, which is this process of, it is impossible for me to say, I am convinced X is true to any degree of confidence without an understanding of X and the methodology that led me to that conclusion. Now, I may have flawed methodology. For example, I am convinced of the common ancestry of the various great apes. And one of the things that cemented that for me, even though I think the fossil record and homology and other things like that are sufficient to reach that conclusion. But specifically, the fusing of chromosome 2 with the telomeres and the centromere, which basically changed the number of pairs of chromosomes that we have with respect to our great ape cousins. That methodology that leads to that is why I am convinced of common ancestry. I like to be able to do that with anything, any position that I'm advocating as true. If I can't do that, I definitely shouldn't be saying that I think something is true. I won't say that I don't say it, because we're all prone to mistakes. But I think it makes me a little bit weird, because I don't even remember the last time I suspected something beyond the pale, I guess, was happening. But plenty of things I don't have explanations for. And I have seen things, like I might see what looks like here's a shape moving across the floor. And at my house, I'm like, oh, that's the real cat, the one real cat we have. Or maybe it's a bug. Maybe it's, some other creature. Maybe it's a shadow from something moving across. But if I just cut it out of the corner of my eye, it's like, oh, weird stuff happens. Sometimes you pick up the phone to call somebody at the same time that they're picking up the phone to call you. That stuff happens. If you try to read into it and say, oh, this was because there's some cosmic hive mind, or because God wanted me to talk to that person, then you're in the same territory as the street preacher that Seth ran into, who thought he was there to deliver to the homeless, but then discovered God really brought him there because the atheists who are going to laugh at his ridiculous assumption of why God brought him there, they're the ones that really needed him. Anyway, that I derailed that. I'm sorry.
No, I get the point of experiencing something and jumping on the narrative and weaving that into sort of kind of the model of reality that fits into what you already have in mind.
Why don't we stick a pin in this right now, Magpie, and yeah. you can think about stuff. If you come up with a better way to either test it, or to talk about it, by all means, give me a call back. But I don't know that I can move any further here, because I don't experience what you have. And we seem to be in agreement that you don't have any way of demonstrating it, and you're not even convinced that it's real. So it's just like, how do you cope with having weird things happen that you don't know what the answer is? And my answer is really simple. I became much more comfortable with saying, I don't know. And is there some way for me to find out? And if the answer appears to be no, there's no way for you to find out right now, I just let it go, because there's 50 million other things to do that are more important than figuring out what that shadow was or what that feeling was.
Yeah, I think that sort of summary, the discussion is about living with knowing the two things in the same level of confidence at the same time. But possibly that's a different discussion, and I'll try to think of a better way to express this to have a further conversation.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Magpie. Well, I just hit my fist on the table because we had a caller who was calling to say that God does not pretend. And I was really excited. It's a return caller. And I was wrapping things up with Magpie so that we could get onto this caller who was going to explain to us how God does not pretend. And just in the time spent wrapping that up, that caller hung up or got disconnected. So if you were that caller, by all means, call back in. We still got lines open, and we always have lines open for theists. The caller was pretend, somebody said. That's funny. Seth, do you still have, and this is genuinely, there's zero judgment here. Do you still have moments where it's like, where you feel the type of stuff that they were talking about? Like walk into a room and it's like, oh, I kind of feel a presence?
Nope. That didn't happen anymore.
Okay.
I think I was expecting, and I was pattern seeking, assigning, but now I don't feel. I never walk into the room and say, "Wow, I feel a presence in the room with me," or when something serendipitous happens, I don't think, "Wow, the cosmos aligned all of these things," or it's all part of a plan, or this couldn't be coincidence. No, I never do that anymore. I see it for what it is.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Like you, when I was in church, when we were praising, when we were praying, when we were swaying, when we'd raise our hands, when, you would feel an elation, a mild euphoria, goosebumps. And the people around me would be like, wow, isn't it amazing, the presence of the Holy Spirit? And so that was the only answer I had. And so if somebody had asked me, when I was 18, hey, have you ever felt something supernatural? You bet your ass I have. Absolutely. I felt the presence of the Holy Spirit. The problem is that when I realized I had no reason to reach that justification, the experience didn't evaporate, but the presumption that I was about what I was experiencing did. And then when I learned getting a better understanding of music, and by the way, I'm zero expert in music. I watch a lot of music theory stuff, and I'm still an idiot. I piddle around on guitar. I know Seth plays piano very well, and no, I'm just saying you probably understand music theory in general better than I do, and I'm assuming you can read sheet music and play along with it at a good clip, right?
A little, yeah. I'm
That's
okay.
that's
Yeah,
what I
I'm all
mean
right.
by better than
Yeah.
me. I do chord stuff and fake stuff and whatever else. But learning how, and you can ask Arden, I watch a fuck ton of Rick Beato and David Bennett and about, I don't know, 6 or 8 other guys going through music theory on piano, on guitar, on all kinds of stuff. And I love it because it shows how music can be constructed to provide specific emotional responses. And it really gets into it when you get into like musical theater. And like I love Book of Mormon, but I also love Phantom of the Opera. And one of the things that you have are these themes and these motifs that get repeated and echoed. And I will say, I don't care who thinks so, I think K-pop Demon Hunters is brilliant. And I mean that both in a musical sense and a narrative sense, because the themes in there are constructed as if it's a musical. The main theme line from Golden gets replayed in This Is What It Sounds Like at a later point. You still hear that theme through there. So it's constructed in this way. And you listen to music and it builds. And I remember, you talked about Kiss and Knights in Satan's Service and backmasking and burning records and all that stuff. I did all of that and found, I I listened to Warnke and a bunch of others, and it was like, oh, I got rid of all my rock albums, and I would listen to nothing but Petra and Carmen for a couple of years. And yet it became obvious, oh, this isn't what God does to us. This is what music does to us. Because I can have the exact same experiences from listening to the secular music that I'm not supposed to be listening to. I can feel elated. I can feel sad. I can cry with joy. I can all of these things, and they know how to bring it out. And Art and I were similar in this regard. We'll be sitting in the living room watching something, and we watch a lot of music content, and some amazingly talented singer like EJ from Huntrix, or Kelly Clarkson, or Ariana, or Sabrina, or Chapel, or anybody. They'll head up and they'll build and they'll hit, and there'll be something about the quality of their voice and the structure of the music, and it'll just be like I'm in a church that I like when that happens. I'm in a church that is not conveying a message that I think is untrue or problematic. I'm in a place of pure emotion, joy, sadness, elation, And once I realized that, when I look back on what happened in church, it feels like smoke and mirrors. It feels like theater. And it feels like bad theater because there's barely a curtain to pull aside to find out what's going on. But enough of my sermon on music. We have one more caller in the queue, but there's room for more. So if the God is not pretend caller would like to call back, or if anybody else would like to call in and let us know that God is in fact not pretend, we'd love to hear it. But calling in from California, pronouns him, is it Sohel wants to talk about Jesus and whether he's a myth. So welcome.
Yeah. Hello, Matt. Hello, Seth. I like you guys. I like the great job you're doing opening people's minds. And probably you remember me. It's not my first time. And I'm really interested in this idea that Jesus never existed. And I'm convinced, like, the more I study about Jesus and about his life and the whole Christian theology, especially when I read St. Paul, I feel that Jesus, in fact, was a spiritual being first. Like, imagine you have a friend you dream about that never existed ever, but you created in your mind, and then people start talking about him as if he was real. So just as in some histories, some heroes became gods, in this case, we have a spiritual being imagined become reality for millions of people, hundreds of millions. And yeah, fun fact is that even some Muslims are now arguing that Muhammad never existed, or some Jewish atheists who would say that Moses never existed. But I see that Jesus is even more. I mean, he's that kind of character that I'm more convinced that he never existed. And there are abundance of evidence about this, especially from Richard Carrier and
No, there's not.
what's his name, Robert Price. Yes, go ahead.
So, well, I just talked a lot. As somebody who knows and has interviewed both Robert Price and Richard Carrier and David Fitzgerald, when you say there's evidence that Jesus didn't exist, what criteria are you using to determine that Jesus didn't exist? Because let's say I claim that there's someone named Jim Bob who lived 75 years ago and danced better than anybody dances today. How would you prove that person didn't exist?
Well, I think the burden of evidence will fall on you then.
No,
because
no,
yes.
no. If they claim that Jesus is real, they do have a burden of proof. But if you claim that Jesus didn't exist, you have adopted a burden of proof. This is why I'm not a mythicist. I'm perfectly happy to say that Christians can't demonstrate that Jesus existed, and that is a huge problem. And I'm willing to just accept it and go on, because I also recognize the proposition Jesus existed doesn't appear to be falsifiable. There doesn't appear to be any way to demonstrate that that claim is false. And if mythicists go the extra step of claiming it is false, then they are essentially claiming to have falsified that which is unfalsifiable, and that is irrational. And I find it a mistake to adopt a burden of proof that you can't meet. Instead, why not just say, I'm not convinced Jesus was real. Prove it to me. And then they have a burden of proof to convince you. But if you say, I'm convinced Jesus didn't exist, now the Christian gets to sit back and say, okay, prove that. And I don't think that's possible. How do you prove it?
Yeah, okay. So if we say that Jesus existed as a historical figure, I mean, we will still have, like, if you take Jesus' like miracles and all the supernatural thing he did away. All these stories about he's walking on waters and healing or raising the dead. I mean, Jesus has become one of millions of people. I remember that millions of Jews back then, like the name Yeshua or Jesus, Yeshua, was a very common name back then. So he will
So,
become like
so,
everyone.
so,
So
so you're
I mean,
acknowledging that
we will not
so you're acknowledging that a bunch of Jesuses did exist. How do you show that the one in the Bible didn't?
because it doesn't matter anymore. Once he became one of millions of people,
No,
it will
that's
not
not how.
make any
No,
sense.
sir.
Yeah.
No, sir. That's not how the burden of proof meets. You don't get to say he's no longer relevant, therefore he didn't exist. That is fallacious. What I need is is an argument that is not fallacious, that demonstrates that Jesus did in fact not exist.
Okay, can you tell me one evidence that shows that Jesus historically did exist?
No, and I don't need to, because I'm not claiming he did exist. You are claiming he didn't. You have the burden of proof. I don't know why this is so difficult, but when I've explained this to you 4 fucking times now, and you come back with, do you have evidence that he did exist? Then you're not paying attention and you're not understanding what I'm saying. My claim is not that he existed. My claim is you have now said he didn't exist. Prove it.
Okay, like one of the evidence would be that, okay, how someone who never met Jesus, like St. Paul, will believe in Jesus in such a way that he was even ready to get stoned, harassed, and pushed around, and even
Okay,
die for
I
it.
apologize, Soul. There's no nice way to say this. This call is a complete waste of everybody's time. You are not yet equipped
Okay.
to understand the burden of proof or to make a case. Instead, you are making a case that they haven't made their case, which I already agree with, and which, by the way, most mythicists would actually agree with. That they're just saying, they're just acknowledging they haven't made their case that he existed. It fits with a number of patterns that are absurd. I am fine with mythicists doing that. It's when you go a step further and saying this person never existed, when there's no way for you to actually demonstrate that. And I don't know why anybody would go that extra step. I find it to be irrational and absurd. So my recommendation would be, until you can demonstrate that he didn't exist, you should stop saying he didn't exist, and you should instead at most say they haven't even demonstrated that he existed.
Well, I think you have a strong point here. I cannot
Then you're
disagree with
correct
that.
for the first time since we started. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Oh my gosh, we just lost the other call. This is wild. Well, Seth,
I think Arden said the switchboard is acting a little wonky, so it's possible some folks are getting kicked back. Technical issue, who knows?
yeah, while
Yeah.
we wait on that,
I'm
Go ahead,
even
hon.
from like actual phone numbers not getting audio from people. I don't know what's wrong. I've tested all my equipment to make sure my end is working, and it seems above board, but like 3 actual phone numbers in a row just not getting any audio from them. So I don't know what's going on.
God is
Maybe
obviously angry, you know. The truly
maybe
angered
I
the
can try
Almighty.
skipping the queue. Let me try this.
Nicholas Zamansky.
I'm sorry, Nicholas. I apologize.
Yes, sir.
I just put you live. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, sir. How are you today?
We're pretty good. We're having some. I want to explain real quick. I'm Matt. I'm the host of the show. You are actually live right now. I'm not the call screener. We were having difficulty with the phone system, and I think you had called a couple of minutes ago and got dropped because we weren't hearing audio. And I wanted to see if we could skip the screening. So, congratulations, you got through without being screened. Let's hope you're awesome, and we will just be confident that you are. Nicholas is calling. Do you have your preferred or he, him? What did you want to talk about?
Well, honestly, I'm curious about, y'all, honestly, if I'm not mistaken. So might as well. I'm owning this. Yes, I am spiritual, as it were. Yes,
Okay.
respect for y'all. I totally respect and understand why you guys don't believe in it, and I totally respect it. Because if I was in your shoes, I would do the same thing.
What do you mean?
But
What do
if
you
I
mean
was
by
in your
spiritual? Can you define what you mean by your spiritual?
So for me, this is me. I'm owning this. Is
Yes.
I
Can you
look at all
define?
religions, as it were, and every one of them has something golden in it, as it were. And I love all of them. And yes,
Hey,
so like
hey,
I can
hey,
say, yep.
Nicholas, how do you define spiritual?
Oh, how you define spiritual? Oh, sorry, I'm a bit nervous, so forgive me.
You're fine. If that's how you
um,
describe yourself, is it a specific spirit? Are you attuned to something that you feel is otherworldly, or do you feel that?
okay.
What spiritual mean?
So this is really cool. So how you're asking me this question is, so spiritual means to me is someone who's connected with divine, with self, and also find ways to connect with others, find ways to bridge, and find ways we can connect. And even though we'll have agreements and disagreements, that there's ways we can find bridging and find understanding of where we're at in our lives, and maybe how we can all grow together and learn from each other. So that's
What
my
I'm
definite.
hearing, what I'm hearing is not anything supernatural. Is sounds to me like communication, interpersonal interactions, empathy, things that human beings do beyond any supernatural or spiritual claim. Human connection is not a spiritual thing,
Hmm.
is it?
It is, because this is me. I'm owning this is when I'm connected with divine, when I'm in prayer meditation, I am choosing to, when I'm with myself, like connected with that. Everybody's connected, and I choose to see the divinity within everybody. Basically, it doesn't matter who you are. I don't care who you are. All that matters is that I respect and I share love where anybody is at, to the best of my ability, and I try and I do the best I can to catch myself if I'm in, say, my own ego, and trying to find ways to connect to the best of my ability. And I'm not perfect at it.
Hang on.
Um,
What do you mean by divinity? You
so
see the
divinity means,
divinity within your fellow human
okay.
beings.
So divinity means that we are collectively connected with God, doesn't matter where you're at, and also divinity means we're all on a spiritual path, doesn't matter who you are, you're
Hang
in
on.
it.
Hang on.
To
Hang
me,
on.
that's my opinion.
God. I just heard the first reference to God. Which
Hmm.
God?
So God to me, well, first of all, God is love, just love, peace, joy, and and I'm starting to kind of feel that, how does God deal with trauma, all the hatred and everything? Well, now this is how I
My
look at it.
question is not the nature of what your God is
Oh,
supposed to do or not do. Is it the
oh,
Christian
well.
God?
Um, so it's a bit tricky. So this is for me. Is
No,
there's
no,
only one
I
God. It
know
doesn't
it's for
matter
you. What I'm
for
asking
me.
is, who is your
Oh.
God? Does it have a proper name?
The only God that I know, that I feel is, you can call it the I am presence, love, peace, joy.
Okay, hang on.
Those
Hold
are
on.
feelings.
Hold on.
That's it.
So I have feelings of love, peace, and joy. No
Mhm.
God's required. Right?
Mhm.
There's no deity involved. So it
Right.
sounds to me like you and I have that in common. Where does God come from in that scenario?
So,
For
so for
you.
me,
Yeah. Yeah,
this
for
is for
you.
me. So
For you.
for God, it's a bit tricky because I can understand because it's been. I'm going to
One week.
start with you said Christian God, for example. So there's two. This is my opinion. This is me.
This is
There's
you. It's for
two.
you. Yes.
Hey,
It's your
hey,
opinion.
pause.
Uh,
I'm
For
gonna
you.
pause for a second. Nicholas, listen to me. I put you on hold for just a second. Um, I'm hoping right now it's a quarter till, which means we've got about 15 minutes. I'm hoping that you and I and Seth can have a conversation that takes us all the way up to the hour and is productive. We understand you're only speaking for yourself. We would not ask you to speak for anybody else. We also understand you're new at this and you're nervous. You don't have to preface everything with caveats and everything else. We're just trying to understand. Every question we ask is, what does God mean to you? What does divinity mean to you? What does spirituality mean to you? We're trying to get to an understanding of what you're actually advocating for. And so when you talk about, for me, God is love and blah, 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 cool. At some point, this is going to get to a real critical issue. I'm going to take you off mute now because Seth was just asking about love,
okay.
like he experiences love. What does saying that God is love add to the concept of love at all? But the question that I have for you that sidetracks this
Okay.
is, do you think your beliefs are true? And do you care if they're true? Or is it enough that they feel right to you?
So, I'm going to do my best to answer that. So for me is I feel in my being that they are true. It's not a thinking in my head, it's a like inner knowing to me. I know that sounds a bit out there, but
Well, I'm just
it's
wondering,
like,
do you think that that's a reliable path to truth?
mhm. Um, yeah, it's something. Yeah, yes, because it's something I can't see.
Wait,
And of
so
course,
because
that's a
you
bit
can't see
hard. I
something, you
understand
think
that.
that makes it a reliable path to truth?
Well, it's so for me is it's the unknowing is like for me it's something that haven't like let's say um how should I put this say more of experience a bit more or uh claimed it owned it for my for me, and also for part of that is taking responsibility and accountability for it. Um, and that kind of goes with that.
Yeah.
And
Okay. Let's get back to Seth's
I hope
question
that
because I
made
don't think
sense.
it did
I
not make
hope.
sense, but that's okay. I want to get back to Seth's question about we experience love.
Okay,
What does saying
cool.
love add to that? And are you saying that we're experiencing God?
Um, at some, yeah, like, yeah, I would say, yeah, like you feel that deep connection that it's like, it's kind of like your mind can't put into words, and you feel like you really feel you want to do something that is right. Yeah, that's in my opinion. Yeah. Anything that's out of that is like, in my opinion, hatred, anger, or something that we allow to get control over is I would say the ego, which something that, in my opinion, that I chose to create myself or allow it to come in and take over and have the responsibility to see it, responsibility, accountability, own it, own the feelings, and then find ways to do about it, take action in a loving, compassionate way. Hope that made sense.
No.
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 I mean,
Sorry.
we're trying to figure
Okay.
out what it is that you believe whether or not it's true. So, like, for example, you say God is
Okay.
love. Do you think that
hmm
God is a thinking agent being, or is God just a label you're putting co-equal to the abstract concept of love?
So God is not a thinking like a man in the sky. Let's get that
Okay.
out of the way.
But
God is
but
a
is God a
consciousness
thinking being?
to me.
God is a
That's
consciousness?
yes.
Okay, how do you know that?
It's something that let me say this in an analogy. So like when I'm in the forest or when I'm sitting next to a tree, it's like I feel connected to the tree and I'm one with the tree. And I feel this deep feeling that I'm never separate from the tree. And I own it, I claim it, and whenever I feel like when I leave, that I always take that feeling with me. And
Nicholas, I've
w-
never felt one with a
the
tree, but let's assume that you do. And let's imagine for a
hmm
second that I'm out in the forest or in the
okay,
backyard and I feel at one with the tree. How does that in any way prove that God is a consciousness?
like for the plants, like they are alive, they have feelings, they um in their own and um and they find ways to connect to all the roots around. So for me,
So
it's kind of
Nicholas,
hard to think. It's more of
so
a feeling.
Nicholas,
It's
even if
deeper
I
in
were to
knowing.
grant
It's
you,
hard for me to
Nicholas,
say in my
even
head
if I were to grant you, even if I were to grant you that plants are alive and have feelings, how does that prove that God is conscious?
because God is only is consciousness because like when there's only love and peace and bridging and connecting, there's unity. That's like God at work, as it
Are you
were,
just
and
chat
like
GPT that
to
somebody
me.
is typing into and feeding me are you like a Deepak Chopra sentence generator?
I thought it was Jordan
Uh
Peterson for a second. That's what I thought.
oh
Maybe
well.
I don't know. Yeah.
If I am saying something, if I am pushing something, I'm not trying to tend to do that. That's
No,
my
what you're
mistake. If
doing
I'm
is
pushing
you are
something,
babbling
oh,
incoherently and not answering the question at all. How would you demonstrate
oh,
that something is conscious and is God?
mm. Something is conscious. It's the air around us. Um,
Holy,
I can be
I don't know.
of no
If
further
you watch. I don't
assistance
know if
in
you
this
watch
matter.
movies or anything.
I watch
I
Um,
can
fuck
be of
let
tons
me
of
see
no
movies.
this.
I watch
further
fuck tons of
assistance
movies
in
and a
this
ton of
call.
things on science and epistemology. And at no point in the history of the world has anyone else on the planet's answer to the question of consciousness been it's the air around us.
I can be of no further assistance in this matter, Nicholas.
Okay. Well, I. Okay. Well, I tried my best to answer it with the best of my ability, even though they weren't correct. Um, the one
And do
thing
you
I
feel like
have
that's a
to say
win?
this,
Do you feel like that's a
uh,
win for you to have done it to the best of your ability, but to have
uh,
made absolutely not one cogent point the entire conversation?
even so, if it wasn't, the
It
one thing
wasn't.
I'm glad about was able to talk to y'all. That's
Why?
because I was able to because
Is that some kind of accomplishment? We're literally here all the time. And the only reason that you're continuing to talk to us right now is because we're like 6 minutes from the end of the show. And I'm desperate to get any sort of cogent thought out of you. Let's try this, Nicholas. Is God an entity, a person, a mind?
my opinion that
No,
it's
tell
in
me my
everybody.
fucking opinion. Of course, I'm asking for your opinion, Nicholas. By the way, that's your verbal tick. Your verbal tick is for me, in my opinion, etc. Those are all the things that you put in as instead of us and ums. So let me ask you this. This is even easier. Does it matter at all to God or you or anyone you can think of if myself or Seth believe in the same God that you do? Does it impact our life in any way?
You don't have to believe in the same God as me, no.
If I don't believe in the God that you believe in, how does it impact my life?
Well, if you don't, let's say, for me is, I would ask this is, for me, the gods, as it were, are just reflections of
I
the
didn't
one
ask
in
what they are.
me.
I didn't ask what they are. I asked, how does it impact my life if I am not convinced that your God is real?
How does it impact your life? Well, so for me, well, if it doesn't impact your life, then that's fine. I have no judgment on
No, I
that.
didn't ask if it's fine, if it does whether or not I believe in your God impact my life in any significant way. Does something bad happen if I don't believe?
If something bad happened
No, that's
and you
not
don't,
what I asked.
oh,
I didn't say if something. Here,
oh,
very carefully. I do not believe that your God is real. If I keep believing that position, or if I keep not
mm-hmm.
believing that your God is real, what happens to me?
For me, uh, I think honestly, what happens to you? Well, nothing will happen to you. Nothing bad will happen to you.
Okay. If I believe that your God is real, what will happen to me?
Nothing bad will happen to you.
No, I didn't say, will anything good happen to me if I believe that your God is real? Or is your God completely fucking useless and irrelevant?
So, so for me,
Nicholas?
so if you didn't believe in God, let's say if you die, I'm going to try my best. Hopefully, is this.
Nicholas,
Hmm.
I think it might be time to go and sit next to the trees and have a good evening. Would that be fair?
Okay, well, apologies if I didn't answer your questions properly. I'm glad I was able to
Apology
talk with you too.
accepted. Goodbye.
Listen to the flower people bloom. Ah. I love
It
that
is
song.
so frustrating because I'm sitting here, I'm like, okay, if I don't believe, is there anything good or bad that'll happen? If I do believe, is there anything good or bad that'll happen? These are kind of straightforward questions. And it's kind of a, how relevant is your God? Because if you say, oh, I believe in a God, but if you don't believe in it, nothing good or bad will follow from that. It's completely irrelevant. Cool. That would have saved me some time. By the way, the other parody I wrote for you Hamilton fans, I'm not actually going to sing it right now because I would like to save that. I've done it once before, but it is the King's thing where you say you didn't know tariffs are something that you'd have to pay. I have an entire parody written for that, turning Trump into the king. I wrote it long before No King's Day, but you know what? It's going to come back out at some point in the near future. I will find somebody who sings much better than I do to do a cover of that for you. Arden Heart our lovely and talented producer, is going to roll the credits right now. If you are watching, we're getting ready to turn you over to Calling It Now with Jimmy Snow. Seth, huge thank you. Happy Sunday, my friend. It's always good to see you. To all of you who are here, if you have a God belief, if you have a supernatural belief, think about the questions that you know we're going to ask and then call in and try to be prepared with some kind of answer. It's really pretty straightforward. In the meantime, thanks for your support for the Seth Go Student Alliance, patreon.com/calltheline and linemerch.com to continue supporting this as the government tries to shut us down as terrorists. No kings, release the Epstein files. Hasta.